Hey guys! Tonight we visit a dinner table where elbows are illegal, forks are suspicious, and your entire reputation might hinge on where you sit relative to the salt. Welcome to the highly choreographed, deeply strange world of medieval mealtime etiquette. You're about to be an honored, yet extremely monitored, guest at a lavish feast where every movement has a hidden meaning and every bite might be your last if you offend the bishop. Picture it, flickering torchlight bouncing off wooden beams blackened with smoke, velvet banners heavy with heraldic lions and lilies, the low thrum of a harp competing with the clatter of pewter goblets. You stand just inside the great hall of a stone manor, your breath fogging slightly in the cool, draughty air. Servants glide by, carrying trays stacked with roasted birds and honeyed apples, while a long table stretches before you, groaning under the weight of loaves, trenchers, and glistening meats. You are starving, but you may not survive this. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Drop your location and local time in the comments. I love seeing where you're tuning in from. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You shuffle forward. The steward eyes you. He has a scroll. It's covered in names and small, judgy notes. You see that you've been placed at the lower end of the hall, just before the sideboard with the leaky jug, which means you're not a lord, not a knight, not even a merchant, but you are just good enough to sit at the table, and in medieval terms, that's a win. This whole dinner has a script. Not like a printed program, but a set of rules everyone somehow knows. You're supposed to walk, not rush. Don't gawk at the food like a peasant, and certainly don't touch anything until the signal is given. That signal? A nod from the host, or sometimes a bell, or a mumbled Latin grace that nobody fully understands but everyone imitates with great reverence and crossed fingers. Sit on a narrow wooden bench. The table in front of you is covered in a heavy linen cloth, slightly stained, but it's probably the cleanest thing in the room. There's no individual plate for you. Instead, there's a trencher, a thick, day-old slab of bread, carved square, like a sad, edible coaster. That will be your plate, your napkin, and eventually a donation to someone less lucky than you. Historians still argue whether trenchers were always meant to be eaten or just tossed to the dogs afterward. Either way, yours smells faintly of beer and ashes. To your left, a man with terrible breath clears his throat. To your right, a silent woman adjusts her wimple. You're surrounded by strangers who will, for the next 2 hours, watch your every move and silently judge your competence based on how you chew, sip, and nod. No pressure. Then it happens. The door at the far end creaks open, and the lord of the manor strides in. His doublet gleams, his boots squish a little too much, and his beard contains more sauce than any human should store on their face. Behind him, his wife, the lady of the house, sweeps in like a ship under full sail. Their arrival is your cue. Everyone stands. A prayer is murmured. Something about harvests and forgiveness and maybe gout. And then, finally, you're allowed to sit and begin the long, fraught dance of not embarrassing yourself. Before food arrives, though, there's one more step: washing. A servant approaches with a basin, a ewer of rosewater, and a small towel. He nods. You extend your hands, unsure of the protocol. He pours water. You panic, nearly clapping your palms together like you're about to pray. He looks horrified. No, hands are washed separately. The water is supposed to run gently over your fingertips, not splash into your sleeves like a novice. He dries your hands with a flourish and disappears. You feel both clean and deeply shamed. There is a theory, still debated by medieval scholars, that the elaborate hand-washing wasn't just about hygiene. It was symbolic, a way to prepare the body and soul for a holy act. After all, eating, in this context, was closer to a religious ritual than a casual meal. This wasn't Taco Tuesday. This was communion with roast goose and elderflower wine. And then the procession begins. From the kitchens below, or the outbuilding nearby, servants begin arriving with trays. The first course is usually something mild. Pottage, bread, maybe cheese if it's not Lent. You watch the upper table receive food first, then the next tier. Eventually your end of the table gets a bowl of something. You're not sure what it is. It's brown, it smells faintly of onions, maybe apples. You dip a spoon, not a fork, certainly not, those are still suspect, and scoop a taste. It's hot, it's bland, it's comforting like a wet pillow, but you eat with gratitude. You've made it to the table. You've passed the hand-washing gauntlet, and dinner has only just begun. Above you, a falcon watches from the rafters. Below, a dog whines quietly for scraps. Somewhere, a lute is tuning up. The night is young, the rules are many, and you haven't even spilled anything yet. You've barely finished your second bite when another servant sweeps past, splashing more rosewater into someone else's hands with grim determination. The bowl sloshes, the towel flutters, and somewhere down the hall, a man sneezes so loudly, he's met with 3 synchronized head turns and a whispered prayer. It's clear now, this isn't just dinner. This is theatre. And you're on stage, performing the role of competent guest under the scrutiny of 50 half-drunk nobles. But don't even think about lifting another bite until you've double-checked that the host has begun eating. Because here's one of the weirder, yet rigidly observed medieval customs. Nobody touches a morsel until the highest-ranking person at the table does. It doesn't matter if your stomach's staging a mutiny. You wait. You watch. And when the Lord finally lifts his spoon, there's a ripple of quiet relief down the table, like someone just hit unpause. As you start to eat, you quickly realize that the food itself is only half the challenge. The placement of people around the table, the who sits where and with whom, is its own strange social dance. This isn't your aunt's Thanksgiving buffet line, where people just plop down wherever. This is an arrangement with consequences. You're placed in the lower mess. Not a mess as in chaos, though the guy next to you is already wiping his hands on the tablecloth, but mess, meaning group of diners. The higher up you are in status, the closer you sit to the lord and lady. That's the coveted high table, which is often literally raised on a small platform. They get the best food, the cleanest dishes, sometimes even music between courses. You're closer to the kitchen door and whatever draft sneaks in from under it. Historians still argue whether these seating charts were flexible, or if they were planned days in advance based on land ownership, family history, and who lent the Lord a warhorse last harvest. But one thing is certain, you don't choose your seat. You are placed, you accept, and you sit with the spine of a candle and the poise of someone trying very hard not to offend a baron. And speaking of offense, don't talk while you chew. Seriously, that's not just bad manners here, it's borderline criminal. In some noble houses it could get you a sideways glance. In others, it could get you relocated to a stool by the wall. Silence during eating was considered a virtue, part monastic influence, part social control. So, instead you chew, slowly, thoughtfully, like each bite is a tiny prayer. You nod politely when someone glances your way, but you don't speak unless spoken to. You sip from your cup between bites, and even that must be done carefully. Because if you sip too much, especially before your neighbor does, you might be seen as impatient or thirsty in a way that raises eyebrows. Across from you, a man in a patched cloak picks at his pottage, frowning. He finally leans toward you and says, in a whisper, "Cold again this season?" You nod as if this is both true and profound. It might be. Or it might be the only safe topic allowed tonight. The social codes here run deep. There's a legend, unconfirmed, but often repeated, that a minor noble in East Anglia once broke protocol by seating himself too close to the salt and was found mysteriously exiled by desert. The message was clear: know your place or someone will gently remind you with a sudden, permanent transfer to Normandy. And yes, the salt matters. You'll learn more about that strange, grainy status symbol later. But for now, just focus on not attracting attention. You eat with one hand, your right hand. The left is considered unlucky or unclean, or both. You don't wipe your nose with your sleeve. You don't blow on your food. You certainly don't reach across someone else's trencher, even if they're hogging the good bits. And yes, you're still sharing a trencher. That stale bread plate you were issued earlier? It's community property. One trencher, two diners. You try to keep to your corner like it's a sacred boundary. But every so often, your table mate lets his gravy drift across the invisible border, and you sigh quietly into your stew. The joke among modern historians is that medieval etiquette was 40% sanitation, 30% hierarchy, and 30% sheer theatre. But even now, you can see why it mattered. These dinners weren't just meals, they were political performances, social auditions, a chance to be seen correctly by people who might decide whether you get land, letters, or a decent marriage offer. And so you eat, you nod, you breathe through your nose and try to ignore the smell of boiled cabbage, which is gradually asserting dominance over every other aroma in the room. Behind you, someone sneezes again. The lute player skips a note. The dog by the hearth lets out a tired groan, and you, brave, freshly washed, slightly numb from posture holding, you survive the first 20 minutes of dinner with your dignity intact for now. You're just getting into a rhythm. Bite, sip, nod, chew. When the woman across the table delicately places her spoon on the edge of her trencher and straightens her back. That's the cue. The second course is coming, and with it, a reshuffling of everything you thought you knew about dining, because now who sits where and why begins to matter even more. The door creaks open again, and another line of servants appears, this time bearing trays with meats, roast duck, sausages stuffed, with dates, slices of venison garnished with something leafy. You lean forward slightly in excitement, but immediately catch yourself. Leaning is rude. It implies greed. You settle back, count your breaths, and hope at least one piece of duck reaches your end of the table. But as you glance along the length of the board, you realize something. Not everyone at this meal is equal, not even close. And it's not just the food, it's where people are positioned. Proximity to the lord and lady means power. Those seated at their sides are important figures, landowners, military allies, maybe the person who lent the manor enough sheep last spring to avoid embarrassment during tax season, and just as important, who isn't invited to sit at all. Some guests stand at the edge of the room, leaning against the wall, watching with empty hands. Maybe they're servants, maybe they're poor relations, maybe they offended the cook last week and are paying the price in cold air and stomach. growls. Whatever their story, they are not at the table. They are below the salt, a term we'll revisit soon enough. You glance at your own placement again. Still safe, but definitely not prestigious. Your seat is toward the lower end of the room, near the window where the draft nibbles at your ankles. If a dish makes it to you, it arrives cooler, drier, and usually with the best bits long gone. But you nod and smile as if every soggy crust is a royal delicacy. Because that's what you do here, pretend to be grateful until you actually believe. Yet historians still argue whether these dinner placements were rigid social orders or more flexible displays of favour. Some say hosts adjusted seating night by night depending on politics or mood. Others believe that once your spot was assigned, you might as well carve your name into the bench. Either way, you quickly learn that dinner is a map of alliances. Take the knight across the room, Sir Wulfric of Dunmere. His tunic is embroidered with silver thread, and he sits just one seat away from the lady of the house. That's a message. Not whispered, not written, but placed. This man matters. He's in. The merchant with the spice caravan, 3 spots down. Important, but not trusted. And the bard, practically in the hallway. You begin to wonder, what would it take to move up the table? A gift, a marriage, heroic, boar slaying, or perhaps simply surviving long enough and mastering these rules so flawlessly that one day a servant calls your name and gestures to a higher seat. Not tonight, but maybe someday. That's the dream of half this room. And then there's the salt. It arrives midway through the course in a small, gleaming container, sometimes shaped like a tower, sometimes like a boat, always crafted with care. It's placed exactly halfway along the table. Anyone seated above the salt is considered noble or distinguished. Those below? Well, let's just say you're probably not being invited to the private hunts. The salt line is both literal and metaphorical. It separates guests into social classes with silent precision. You tonight are below the salt. You try not to take it personally. Meanwhile, conversation remains hushed, mostly centered on land disputes, marriage prospects, and the occasional commentary on someone's cloak fabric. You're not meant to interrupt. You're meant to listen, smile, and speak only when prompted. So you do. You watch the meats go by. You murmur polite things when someone offers you a turnip. And you pay attention to the one big rule everyone here obeys without question. You never, ever challenge the seating. In fact, there are tales, possibly apocryphal, but deliciously dramatic, of noblemen who tried to claim higher seats than they deserved. One supposedly swapped place cards at a feast in York. He was discovered halfway through the fish course and banned from the household for life. Another tried to bribe a steward. He ended up hosting his own dinners from then on, with far fewer guests and even colder pottage. Because in this world where you sit says who you are. And unlike in modern life, you don't get to earn that status just by shouting on the internet or having a nice horse. You earn it through alliances, bloodlines, land, and occasionally sheer dangerous charm. As the second course winds down, your trencher is soaked and sagging. The meat has gone lukewarm, but you eat what's left with quiet pride. You've stayed in your lane, kept your posture upright, and, most impressively, not tried to sneak a piece of anything from someone else's half. A dog has appeared beneath your bench. He eyes your trencher. You glance at your seatmate, then nudge the soggy corner toward the dog with the toe of your boot. He accepts your offering like a knight receiving his sword. He is now your best friend. This may be your only real ally in the room. As the servants begin collecting empty dishes and soiled bread slabs, you sit back, still not slouching, mind you, and let out a tiny, inaudible sigh. You made it through another round without a single breach of protocol. But don't relax too much. The next course is on its way, and with it, a new set of rules. You lift your goblet to your lips, gently, reverently, as though it might shatter if handled too boldly. And you pause, because of course you pause. You remember now, you cannot simply drink, not yet. Not unless someone of higher status has done so first, and even then there's a ritual to it. You glance up the table. The Lord has lifted his cup. He turns his head just slightly, enough to nod at the lady beside him, and together they drink. Not fast, not deeply, just enough to show that the wine isn't poisoned, probably. Now, and only now, may you follow suit. The wine is warm, a little sour, possibly thinned with water, possibly just old. But you pretend it's divine. You take a careful sip, keeping your elbow close to your side, no dramatic gestures, and you lower your cup just as carefully. You exhale through your nose. You've done it right, but you're not done with the rules. Drinking in the medieval world came with its own manual. And unlike the modern raise your glass and shout something embarrassing, the toasts here were about hierarchy, health, and honor, and occasionally complicated flirtation. You hear it before you see it. A soft clink of goblet to goblet from across the table. Two men raise their drinks toward each other with the solemnity of an oath. One says something in Latin, the other responds with a short bow. Then they drink. Toasting is not casual here. It's a deliberate act, one that must be reciprocated. If someone toasts you, you must stop, acknowledge, and toast them back. Failure to do so isn't just rude, it's suspicious. Did you just insult them? Are you accusing them of something? Are you avoiding eye contact because you fear poison? Historians still argue whether these rituals stemmed from genuine paranoia or just from the high drama of courtly performance. Either way, the result is the same. You toast or you cause a scene. And there's more. You must make eye contact while toasting, not a casual glance, a direct, meaningful stare. If you're shy, this moment is agony. If you're bold, it's a chance to assert yourself. If you're flustered, there's a decent chance you'll knock your goblet into the gravy and ruin your life. It's also worth noting that you don't get to refill your cup whenever you feel like it. That's the job of the cupbearer, usually a young man of noble birth, whose main qualifications are clean hands, a steady pour, and political neutrality. In grand households, the Lord's cupbearer might even taste the wine first, just to make sure it's not full of nightshade, which, yes, was a real concern. Poisoning at the table, while rare, was feared enough to shape entire dining customs. Elaborate cup designs with lids and locks, royal testers who took a swig before the monarch did. Some guests even carried their own spoons or cups just in case someone got clever. And if you're wondering whether the drinking vessels were at least pretty, well, yes and no. The richest guests drink from silver or pewter goblets, possibly engraved with family crests. Others get ceramic cups or wooden ones if they're really low on the ladder. And if you're lucky enough to dine at a monastery, you might get stoneware so heavy it doubles as a blunt weapon. You sip again, slowly, carefully. A man 3 seats down lets out a laugh, too loud, heads turn. He lifts his goblet again to cover the awkwardness, toasts a woman who clearly wasn't listening. She blinks at him, unsure how to respond. It's a disaster, but a subtle one, the kind you only catch if you've been watching closely, like you have. Nearby, a servant carries a new jug of wine to the high table. It's not the same stuff you're drinking. No, their wine is darker, sweeter, maybe spiced, maybe not watered down. They nod in appreciation. One even winks. You pretend not to notice. Then the steward passes by, his eyes scanning goblets like a hawk. He's not just looking for empties, he's checking your grip, your posture, whether you're cradling the cup like a beggar or lifting it like a knight. You straighten your fingers immediately. Your new friend, the dog, bumps your shin in support. And don't think for a second that what you drink is just wine. Ale and mead were common, but both were treated with care. Even water, when available, was often mixed with herbs or vinegar to make it safer, though whether that actually helped is up for debate. You sip what you're given. You never request substitutions. That's not your place. Then there's the matter of when to drink. You must not drink during prayer, or during a toast you're not part of, or when someone of higher rank is speaking, and heaven help you if you drink while someone is carving meat. That's a whole other offense we'll get to later. It's funny, you thought the danger would be the food, the questionable fish, the undercooked bird, the suspicious pastry shaped like a hedgehog. But no, the real risk is the goblet. Lift it too soon, too late, too often, or too boldly. And suddenly the meal has shifted, and you are a story told around future tables. Remember that guest who slurped during the toast? Poor soul, haven't seen him since Michaelmas. You finish your drink. Not all of it, just enough to show that you appreciated it. You place the goblet back on the table, not too hard. No, clinks, just a soft landing. The steward nods faintly. You've passed the test, for now. The room is getting warmer, the fire crackles. The candlelight sways slightly as a draught slips through the tapestry-covered walls. You roll your shoulders subtly, without slouching. A third course is on its way. The meats are getting heavier, the sauces are growing bolder. But you're learning, you're adapting, and you still haven't spilled a drop. Your goblet sits quietly in front of you, emptied with the precision of a court magician. The warmth of the wine has loosened the atmosphere just slightly, but not your posture, heavens no. Now comes the bread course, or more accurately, you already had bread, but now we get serious about it, course, and with it, a fresh new rule to decipher. A servant approaches, and to your momentary relief, you're not given another mysterious meat or a suspicious fish. Instead, a small pile of crusty rolls is dropped unceremoniously between you and your trencher partner. But before you so much as reach, you pause again, because you've seen it happen. One wrong move, and someone gets lectured by a steward with a forehead vein so prominent it should get its own title. You glance sideways. The unspoken question, who gets first pick of the rolls? There's a hierarchy here too. Age, rank, and whether or not your family banner includes a lion all factor into this subtle pecking order. You make the wise choice, gesture for your seatmate to go first. He obliges, selecting the least cracked roll with suspicious speed. You take the next one, grateful it's only slightly harder than a flint pebble. You place it beside your trencher, and you wait, because, aha, you remember the napkin situation, or rather, the complete lack of lap-based napkin behavior. You glance around, confirm your memory, and yes, nobody has a napkin on their lap. That's not a thing yet. In fact, what you do see is the occasional linen tucked into someone's collar like a child about to eat spaghetti. But among the nobility, there's a more prestigious method. The correct place for your napkin, draped over your left shoulder, and it's not a napkin so much as a folded, heavily starched cloth that looks like it's been blessed, ironed, and possibly sharpened for defense. You adjust yours gently, trying to emulate the easy confidence of the man down the table who dabs his mouth like he's painting miniature icons. Historians still argue whether shoulder-draped napkins were purely for show or genuinely useful. Some records suggest they were reused between courses. Others claim they were decorative, like a culinary epaulet to indicate civility. But all agree putting your napkin in your lap marked you as tragically unrefined, possibly French. So when the stew arrives, hot, fragrant, suspiciously purple, you're ready. You lean in just enough to inhale the scent, cloves, old beets, and lift your spoon with care. You let it drip briefly, then bring it to your lips, all while keeping your shoulder cloth primed in case of splash. It's at this moment that you fully appreciate the art of the dab. No dramatic wiping, no sweeping your entire chin with a forearm. Just a gentle, practiced touch to the corner of the mouth. Dab pause, return cloth. That's it. Do it wrong, and someone will tell your grandchildren. Across the table, someone sneezes. Not a dainty sneeze, a full-throated, soul-leaving-the-body sort of event. There's a moment of shared, horrified silence. Then, almost in unison, several guests reach for their napkins and press them gently to their faces. It's not out of fear. It's etiquette. You sneeze. You dab. It's part of the choreography. There's also the question of how often you use your napkin. Too frequently and you appear fussy. Not enough. And someone starts a rumor that you were raised by goats. The balance is delicate, and don't even think about wiping your fingers on it after tearing into a piece of greasy fowl. For that, there's the finger bowl. But that's not until later. For now, you just gently smear any unwanted sauces onto your trencher. Remember, it's edible. And pretend that eating with dignity comes naturally. The napkin, as small a detail as it seems, has a gravity all its own. Entire books of etiquette, yes, actual books, were written in the later medieval period with chapters on this very subject. They explain with alarming seriousness when to use the napkin, how to fold it, and whether to bow your head while dabbing. The consensus seems to be yes, just a little. Your neighbor, who seems to have dined at more of these events than you, have hot meals in your life, performs the gesture with a sleepy grace. He dabs mid-laugh, mid-sip, even mid-side-eye at someone's unevenly sliced turnip. You try your best to imitate, but it's hard. The cloth itches, it slides a little. You adjust it again, subtly, and as you do, the steward catches your eye. He nods, not with approval exactly, but with acknowledgement. You are trying, and that, for now, is enough. The bread, surprisingly, is quite good. You tear off pieces with your right hand only, never the left, and use it to sop up the last of the stew. You dab again. You feel oddly powerful. You've made it through 2 courses, learned at least 5 rules, and your napkin is still white. Mostly. And just when you begin to relax, a new challenge presents itself. A man at the far end of the table knocks over his goblet. Red wine spills across the cloth. The room freezes. It's not the spill that's shocking, it's his reaction. He grabs his napkin, his shoulder-draped badge of dignity, and throws it onto the puddle. Gasps, audible ones. You watch as a steward briskly escorts him from the room, quietly, discreetly, but clearly with finality. The man disappears behind a curtain and is not seen again. The napkin is not a rag, it is a symbol. And now you will never forget. You sit straighter, you dab more gently, you keep your goblet firmly upright, and your bread politely torn. And above All else you make peace with the napkin on your shoulder. It is your ally, your signal to the world that while you may be new here, you belong. The bread has been torn, the napkin dabbed, and you've begun to settle into the rhythm of the feast. Just when things feel manageable, your eyes fall on a small, glittering object across the table, a fork. It's strange, delicate, almost insect-like. 2 tines, polished. It sits beside a trencher like it's unsure whether it belongs here. And judging by the reactions of your fellow diners, neither are they. You've never used a fork before. Not in this century, anyway. And in this moment, surrounded by fingers, knives, and the occasional spoon, the fork looks suspicious. Too dainty, too foreign, too much like something that belongs to someone who also bathes voluntarily. And that's not far from the truth. Forks in this period are still considered a little scandalous, exotic, effeminate even. Imported by the Italians, those flamboyant innovators of pasta and plague masks. In much of Northern Europe, using a fork is seen as pretentious at best, blasphemous at worst. There's a famous tale, possibly exaggerated as medieval tales often are, about a Byzantine princess who brought forks to a Venetian court. She used them so effortlessly, so extravagantly, that the locals were horrified. When she died young, some claimed it was divine punishment for her sinful utensil habits. Historians still argue whether this is moral fable or smear campaign, but the attitude stuck. For many nobles, fingers were good enough for Christ, they're good enough for roast duck, and so you resist the temptation. The fork glimmers there like a test, but you know better. You reach for your knife instead, broad-bladed, slightly dull, and begin carving a piece of mutton with the grace of someone who absolutely does not wish to be accused of heresy this evening. The knife is your primary tool. For cutting, yes, but also for spearing, scooping, smearing, and occasionally fending off greedy neighbors. It's common for nobles to carry their own knives to dinners, often in decorated sheaths on their belts. Using your own cutlery shows both preparedness and status. But don't be fooled, your knife is not a license for messiness. Medieval manners demand careful one-handed eating. You must carve small, precise bites and bring them to your mouth without spilling. If anything drops, you pretend it didn't. Or better yet, subtly guide it to the dog beneath the table, who now wags his tail with a loyalty that borders on worship. Across from you, someone does attempt the fork. He picks it up gingerly, pinches, a beat with it, and raises it to his mouth like he's plucking a forbidden fruit. People notice. A few exchange glances. One man whispers something to his neighbor. The word Sicilian is definitely uttered. And then, an accident. The fork clinks on the plate. Not loudly, but enough. The steward's ears twitch. He walks over slowly, like a hawk circling a sleepy mouse. The man with the fork blinks, stammers, places it back down as if it bit him. The steward says nothing, just nods once, sharply. A warning, then retreats. You stare at your own trencher, grateful for your restraint. Now, it's not that forks are entirely unknown in this era. They exist, especially in the Mediterranean, and are used by some women of high status to eat candied fruits or slippery morsels. But in most noble courts of Northern Europe, forks are still novelty items. Conversation starters. Perhaps even scandal bait, and besides, most foods are designed to be finger-friendly. Stews are spooned, roasts are sliced, and pies are cut open, with the edge of your knife and scooped with crust. If it's sticky, you mop it with bread. If it's dry, you chew it longer. And if it's confusing, you wait until someone else eats it first. The idea of communal eating reinforces all this. Remember, you're often sharing a trencher. There's a delicate choreography to not getting your neighbor's gravy on your side. Using fingers means more control, ironically. A fork might look refined, but one wrong stab and your pie filling is halfway to the candlestick. So you stick with the basics. Knife in your right hand. Fingers poised. Occasionally you dab your shoulder napkin like a seasoned knight of etiquette. You ignore the fork like it owes you money. And then comes a test. The next dish arrives, steaming and unfamiliar. It's a pear poached in spiced wine, sprinkled with something white and granular, possibly sugar, possibly ground bone. Who knows? You glance around. Others are spearing it with knives, then pinching bites between thumb and forefinger. But one person, one very confident noblewoman, uses a tiny golden fork. 3 times. Graceful wrist movement. She twirls the pear like it's dancing. Everyone watches. No one says a word, because if you're rich enough, you can do whatever you want, including inventing new dining customs on the spot. You take a bite with your fingers. The pear is sweet, soft, slightly gritty. Probably sugar, definitely not bone. You nod in appreciation. You've passed another test. The fork remains untouched beside the trencher. A symbol, a temptation, a warning. Like many things in this meal, it's less about practicality and more about perception. You drink, you dab, you carve, you survive. And somewhere in the shadows, the steward watches. You settle back for a moment, your stomach just beginning to admit it's slightly full. Your hands warm from the nearby candle. Just as you begin to feel something resembling contentment, you spot movement from the corner of your eye. A servant, approaching with a clean cloth in hand. Another course? No, it's something else. He stops beside the high table first, bows deeply, and presents a fresh linen napkin to the lord. Then he pours a small stream of water over the man's hands from a silver jug into a basin and offers the cloth to dry. It's ceremonial. It's not about actual cleanliness, it's a ritual. The entire room watches, quietly mimicking the gesture in their minds, preparing for the moment they too will be purified once again. Because in a medieval feast, eating is holy, but so is not being greasy. The servant makes his way down the table, and soon it's your turn. He bows ever so slightly, and you extend your hands. This time you don't make the same mistake as before. You hold your hands out, palms down, fingers just slightly spread. He pours. The rosewater is tepid and scented with something floral. Your fingers tingle. You don't look him in the eye. That would be awkward. You take the cloth, pat gently, and return it. You don't wipe your face, or your sleeves, or, heaven forbid, your cutlery. Just your fingers, always your fingers. It's one of the many small but deeply formal acts that form the framework of this dinner. Now refreshed, you turn your attention back to the table just in time to see the arrival of the grand salt cellar. And not just any salt. This is the salt, the centerpiece, the divider of destinies. The object is beautiful, gilded, enameled, shaped like a turret or a miniature ship, depending on the household style. In some halls, it might be large enough to require 2 hands to carry, in others, small and dainty, but it always sits in the same place, the midpoint of the table, because here's the key. This salt marks social geography. It doesn't flavor the food so much as it flavors status. Those seated above the salt are the highborn, the favored, the celebrated. Those seated below the salt, like you, are less exalted. Not outcasts per se, but definitely not getting first pick of the capons. This practice is so consistent across noble homes that above the salt becomes a shorthand, a way to describe someone standing even outside the dining hall, in letters, in gossip, in marriage negotiations. She's a woman of salt standing, someone might say, and everyone would know what that meant. Historians still argue over the origins of this particular custom. Was it imported from Roman banquet practices? Or was it a uniquely medieval invention tied to the cost and rarity of salt itself? After all, salt is expensive, not rare exactly, but precious, to place it. In the middle of the table was to remind everyone where the wealth sat, literally. You resist the urge to lean toward it, even to peek inside. You don't need salt, or at least not in the way you might at home. Most medieval dishes are already heavily seasoned, not always well, but definitely enough. A little clove here, a lot of vinegar there, and meat that's been so thoroughly preserved it practically crunches. You're more likely to get a vinegar-based sauce than actual salt. But still, the symbolic salt sits there, gleaming, watching like a tiny lighthouse of judgment. And if you're thinking that modern table etiquette has too many forks, oh friend, you haven't yet had to navigate the unwritten rule of the bread knife, which belongs to the host. And if you want to cut a slice, you ask politely, hands visible, and make sure no one mistakes your reach for a bold political gesture. Meanwhile, the man beside you wipes his hands subtly on the tablecloth. Your breath catches. A low ripple of discomfort moves through the nearby diners. No one says anything, but you feel it, like thunder under the skin. You glance at the steward. He has noticed. He doesn't move, but his eyes narrow slightly, like a cat spotting a careless mouse. The cloth wiper is now on a kind of social probation. This is how it works. No loud corrections, no yelling, just tiny consequences for tiny violations. One day you sit 3 places down, the next 5. You never quite understand why, but you learn quickly. Then, in a sudden shift of tone, someone at the upper table tells a joke, a real one with a punchline and a scandalous implication, about a bishop. There's polite laughter, a few bolder chuckles. Even the lady of the house smiles behind her goblet. This is rare, a moment of looseness. You take the opportunity to stretch your shoulders discreetly and refill your cup. The steward allows it. Just this once, as the laughter fades, you notice something strange. The napkins have vanished from several guests' shoulders. Not stolen, just discreetly whisked away by servants during the wash sequence. You glance at yours. Still there. Still crisp. Still clean. You adjust it proudly. And then the dog under the table lets out a massive, satisfied huff. He licks something sticky off the floor, possibly half a prune, and flops against your boot. You let him stay. He's the only one at this table allowed to eat with his mouth open. By now the fire has burned low. The smoke curls toward the ceiling, collecting in dark patches where the beams are already blackened with centuries of soot. Candles flicker in brass holders shaped like griffins and angels. The table shines dully with the remnants of food, the shimmer of fat, and the careful arrangement of cups, knives, and untouched forks. You've learned a lot already. The hand washing, routine, the shoulder napkin, the dangers of drinking too early, and the invisible but immovable rule of salt. You take another small bite of bread. It's gone a bit stale, but so have many of the guests. You fit right in. By now you've grown accustomed to the ambient murmur of the feast, the low chatter of the upper table, the clink of metal against trenchers, the occasional bark from underfoot. You begin to think, perhaps foolishly, that the rhythm of things has stabilized, And that's exactly when someone raises a cup with pointed intent and locks eyes with you. Oh no, it's not a toast in your honor. You're not that important. But it's a drinking gesture, and that means you're expected to respond in kind. Lift your cup, meet their gaze, and drink together in mutual acknowledgement of something. Friendship, solidarity, or maybe just the shared awkwardness of trying not to spill beet sauce down your tunic. So you do. You lift your goblet carefully, steady your elbow, and look the man square in the eye as you drink. Not too long, just long enough. Any longer, and it starts to feel like a duel. He nods. Once. Mutual respect has been achieved. You return your cup to the table. Drinking, you see, is more than thirst. It's ceremony, and no part of that ceremony is more bewildering than the use of the loving cup. You don't have one yet, but you've heard whispers. You know it's coming. Sure enough, from the high table, a servant emerges with a silver chalice, wide, stemmed, ornately engraved. He carries it like a relic, arms extended. It's filled with wine, or mead, or something stronger. And it's about to begin its solemn, circuitous journey around the room. The loving cup. It sounds romantic, but it's less about love and more about loyalty, tradition, and terrifying proximity to someone else's spit. The rules are simple but strict. The cup is passed between pairs of guests. One drinks while the other stands, guarding them. Then they switch. It's a relic from the days when everyone assumed they might be assassinated at dinner. Still feels relevant. It reaches the high table first. The Lord drinks. The lady stands beside him, watching the room. Then they switch. No talking. Just a kind of holy silence. When finished, the cup is wiped ceremoniously by the servant with a cloth and passed on to the next pair. And here it comes. It moves down the table, guest by guest. You begin reviewing the process in your mind. Stand, watch, sip, do not gag. Wipe lip discreetly, pass left, breathe normally, smile faintly. Do not die. When it reaches your neighbor, your heart thuds. You rise, stand tall. He drinks. You pretend to guard him like a loyal companion, scanning the room with a seriousness you do not feel. No assassins, only a woman in a starched veil, buttering a radish. Then it's your turn. You take the cup. It's surprisingly heavy, warm from many hands. You sip. Not a gulp, just enough. It tastes like mulled wine, cinnamon, maybe clove, possibly regret. You swallow, wipe, nod. Pass it to the next unfortunate soul. Congratulations. You've just survived a medieval trust exercise disguised as a hygiene challenge. Historians still argue whether the loving cup was truly about trust or simply a way to slow the pace of heavy drinking. Some believe it was once linked to ancient ritual, others say it was just another elaborate excuse to get people to make eye contact and acknowledge one another. Whatever the origin, it persists, and like most traditions here, it's equal parts, charming and mildly terrifying. And if you think that's the end of drinking protocols, think again. Every type of cup at the table has unspoken meaning. Tall, narrow goblets for nobles, squatter vessels for lower-ranking guests, covered cups, like reliquaries with lids, sometimes indicate wealth, sometimes paranoia. One man across the hall drinks from what appears to be a pewter flask, disguised as a bird. He cradles it lovingly. You suspect he brought it from home. In especially lavish halls, there might be drinking horns, passed in a similar fashion, held carefully with both hands and tilted just so. They are beautiful. They are impractical. They spill easily. But to drink from one is to be seen and sometimes That's all that matters. There are rules about when not to drink too. Don't sip during a benediction. Don't drink when someone higher ranking is speaking. And certainly don't slurp. A man once slurped at the Duke of Berry's winter feast and was demoted to the garden staff within the hour. The tulips never recovered. And speaking of noise, you begin to notice something curious. No one clinks their goblets together. No loud toasts. No cheers. This is not a tavern. This is a court. Even the most raucous jokes are punctuated by polite laughter and barely audible chuckles. The loudest sound is the occasional cough or the scraping of a trencher as someone rearranges their food to appear more satisfied than they are. You're reminded once again that everything here is performance. The drinking is rehearsed. The posture is watched. The smallest gesture, a cup raised an inch too early or held with the wrong hand, can alter someone's perception of you forever. So you sit straighter. You sip with care. You meet the next. Toast with a perfectly timed nod. You are not thirsty. You are not drunk. You are present. And that, in this world, is a rare kind of power. The goblet rests lightly in your hand now, your fingers relaxed, your movements deliberate. Around you, the murmur of conversation continues, never loud, never wild, just the gentle ebb and flow of status-protected small talk. And then your eyes fall on something deceptively small yet absurdly significant. The salt. Not just the ceremonial salt cellar you admired earlier, still perched like a gleaming little throne halfway up the table. No, this is table salt, actual grains of it being sprinkled carefully over food by the lord of the manor himself. It's a quiet act, but heads turn. You've already learned that salt means status, but now you're beginning to understand just how deep that symbolism runs. Here's the thing. In the medieval world, salt is more than seasoning. It's preservation. It's power. And above all, its placement. You're sitting below the salt, remember? So you have no easy access to that glittering little pile of authority at the center of the table. In fact, unless someone graciously offers to pass it, or worse, the steward decides you've earned a pinch, you're out of luck, not that you'd dare ask. That would be like demanding a turn with someone's crown. It's called being below the salt. And yes, this is where the phrase comes from. Not just a literal distance from a condiment, but a codified social ranking you can see at a glance. Guests of importance are seated above the salt. Those who aren't, well, they still get food, but not much voice, not much visibility, not much salt. Historians still argue whether this tradition was formalized in writing or simply a custom that everyone obeyed like instinct. Some suggest that salt was too expensive to waste on lesser guests. Others think it was a way to maintain order in a world where dining could easily spiral into chaos if hierarchy weren't constantly reinforced. Whatever the origin, the message is clear. You are where you sit, and it's not just the salt that reflects this. Take a look at the plates, or rather the trenchers. The upper table guests may have ceramic or pewter dishes, sometimes even adorned with crests or filigree. Down at your end, the trenchers are bread. Thick, sturdy slabs of stale brown bread, cut square and hardened into something like edible floor tile. You eat from it. You mop your sauce with it. And eventually, when you've scraped it clean, you don't eat the trencher itself. Not unless you're extremely hungry or extremely unlucky. Instead, it's collected and given to the poor, or to dogs, or to the monastery. Depending on the household, it's a noble gesture in theory, but in practice, it's also a reminder. Your food rests on something disposable, a platform that can be passed along. You too are meant to consume modestly and leave behind only what others might find useful. And if that sounds grim, consider the flip side. You're part of a chain. You eat. You leave scraps. Someone else survives on those scraps. Society functions. Kind of, you glance toward the high table again. They're now onto some kind of poultry, quail maybe, small, golden-skinned, and served whole. You, on the other hand, are looking at a stew that might contain parsnip, might contain turnip, might just be a colour masquerading as food. Still, you smile, you chew, you dab your napkin with purpose. Just then, your neighbour, a wiry man with uneven sleeves and very white teeth, leans slightly in your direction. "Don't ask for the salt," he mutters without looking at you. "Even if your meat is grey." You nod, once, gravely. Noted. Even more telling than the food is the conversation. Or more precisely, who is allowed to speak, and when. The high table has a running dialogue, witty, gentle, carefully curated. They discuss hunting dogs and cathedral renovations, and whether the Bishop of Norwich really did fall asleep during Mass last week. Your end of the table, though, is more subdued. People speak only when spoken to. A merchant attempts a comment about fish markets and is politely ignored. Someone clears their throat and then thinks better of it. The silence here is not heavy, but it is absolute. You are here to eat and observe, not to entertain, and so you turn your attention back to your trencher. You make neat cuts. You keep your fingers dry. You never lick them. And above all, you never lean toward the salt. There's a kind of irony in all of this. Salt, which we now take for granted on every diner counter, every cafeteria tray, was once a luxury so precious it dictated dinner party politics. And it's not just for taste. Salt was vital for preserving food, especially meat, during long winters or slow pilgrimages. It was traded like gold, taxed like wine, and used in blessings, contracts, even oaths. Some towns grew rich on nothing but salt flats and clever canals. In some places, guests were literally welcomed with salt as part of hospitality. In others, denied it as a form of insult. There are records of nobles flinging salt into a fire as a curse. Others would swear loyalty while touching a bowl of it. To eat salt with someone meant to share a bond. To be denied salt meant you weren't welcome at all. So when you notice the Lord reaching for the salt and offering it, graciously, wordlessly, to the merchant seated just above it, you realize you're witnessing a gesture of real significance. It's not just seasoning, it's acceptance, it's political theatre with crystals. You, though, you look at your stew, you take another bite, you pretend it's well seasoned. You smile into the candlelight and pretend that you're not just below the salt, you're perfectly content there. The dog beneath your bench agrees wholeheartedly. He's just found a carrot stem and looks delighted. The salt cellar sparkles, untouched. Your cup is full. Your hands are clean. And you've made it through another round of medieval dinner politics without being demoted to the garden. Progress. By now, the air in the hall is thick with the aroma of roasted meats, boiled vegetables, and the faint but ever-present perfume of beeswax candles and damp wool. You feel a pleasant heaviness in your limbs, not quite drowsy, but certainly slow. And just as you're settling into this lull, someone at the far end of the table stretches. Elbows on the table. It's over in an instant. A steward appears, not quickly, not dramatically, but inevitably, and places a hand gently on the guest's shoulder. A quiet word is spoken. The elbows vanish. The guest nods with all the solemnity of a man who has just remembered his own mortality. Because in a medieval feast, putting your elbows on the table is basically social treason, and you tuck your own arms in more tightly, just in case. Elbow etiquette might sound silly, but it's deeply symbolic. The table isn't just where food is eaten, it's where status is confirmed, where discipline is shown, and where civilization, at least the medieval version of it, is performed. Elbows say casual, and casual is not on tonight's menu. This is not a tavern. This is a stage. You begin to notice more. A man across from you scratches his neck. Not dramatically, just a gentle, itchy gesture. But you see the flicker of judgment in the eyes of his neighbor. Touching your face during a feast? Risky? Scratching anything? Doubly so, it implies discomfort, possibly disease, and definitely a lack of self-restraint. One woman sneezes. She does it gracefully into her napkin, turning her head, eyes gently closed. She dabs. No one reacts. Perfect form. A few minutes later, a young boy to her left sneezes as well. Loud, wet, no napkin. His mother blanches. The steward is summoned. The boy is removed, not punished, just taken to the side for refreshment. He will return when he has recovered his dignity and maybe washed his face. Historians still argue whether these rules stemmed from practicality or a deep psychological need to separate humans from animals at the table. Likely both. After all, dinner is where the line is drawn between beast and noble. And if that line wobbles, so does the whole illusion. Good posture is another invisible law. You sit upright, but not stiff. Chin level. Hands visible, but not fidgeting. Your knife hand stays poised. Your non-dominant hand rests lightly on your lap, or, more often, grips the edge of the bench to prevent slumping. And under no circumstances do you rest your head on your hand. That's for the weary, the poor, the kinds of people who sleep in haylofts and say things like, "Supper's just cabbage again, not you, not tonight." A monk once wrote that proper posture at a table reflected the condition of the soul. To slump was to show spiritual laziness. Even the body, he insisted, must be devout while digesting. That may sound absurd, but you glance around and realize everyone is doing it. Nobles, merchants, distant cousins, they all sit like they're being painted for a family tapestry. Even the dog under the bench, snoring gently, seems to have good form. One of the subtler rules, though, one that isn't written down, but everyone somehow knows, is what to do with your hands between courses. You mustn't fold your arms. That says, "I'm closed." You don't rest your hands on the table unless invited. That says, "I'm impatient." Instead, the proper stance is resting your fingertips lightly on the tablecloth as though you're feeling for vibrations from a distant drum. And while we're on the subject of body language, eye contact. You've already learned that eye contact is essential during toasts, but during the meal itself it's delicate. Too much and you're staring. Too little and you seem shifty. Ideally, you gaze ahead, nod politely when spoken to, and occasionally look to the high table with mild admiration. Don't ogle, don't squint. Don't ever, ever roll your eyes. If someone does make a mistake, spills something, reaches across another's trencher, or says the word spleen during the stew course, you do not laugh. Not out loud, perhaps a smile tightly controlled. But even then, you turn your head to disguise it. Laughter is powerful at the medieval dinner table, but it must be rare, controlled, and socially sanctioned. The kind that erupts from a jest told by someone above the salt. acceptable, the kind that bubbles out of you because the man next to you dribbled carrot mash onto his boot. Dangerous. You're learning now that medieval manners aren't just about keeping things tidy, they're about maintaining order, about reminding everyone, from the lord to the laundress, that their place is secure, visible, and maintained by custom, and every movement, every elbow placement, every posture correction, every silent smile helps reinforce that invisible web. So when the next course arrives, a surprisingly delicate-looking pie, its crust glazed and flecked with what might be gold leaf, you do not lean forward in excitement. You sit still. You nod. You wait. Only when the steward gives the nod and your trencher mate makes the first move do you take your knife and cut a small, measured slice, sweet, possibly pear, possibly fish, pretending to be pear. You chew carefully. You keep your elbows off the table. You don't scratch. You don't yawn. You sit as though being sketched by a court artist who only draws people with perfect posture. And it works. No one notices you, which in this world is often the highest compliment of all. Just as you're marveling at the delicate mystery of the possibly pear, possibly fish pie, something even stranger happens. The steward returns, this time without food, and begins moving between diners, gently collecting cups, goblets, and jugs. One by one, the drinking vessels are taken away, wiped, and returned in a new configuration. You blink. Did they just rearrange everyone's cups? Yes, they did. Welcome to the next stage of the evening, the ritual of moderation. You might think a medieval feast is about indulgence. And to be fair, there's a lot of food, wine, and occasional bear-based entertainment. But that doesn't mean guests are allowed to appear indulgent. In fact, the more elegant you are, the less you eat, at least visibly. Eating with moderation is one of the era's most unbreakable social expectations. You must demonstrate that you are satisfied, but not gluttonous. Enthusiastic, but restrained. Hungry, but holy. And if that sounds exhausting, that's because it is. So far, you've done well. You've eaten everything offered, but never the last bite. You've sipped, but never guzzled. You've dabbed your mouth more often than you've spoken, but now the real test begins. The next dish is being served. Slices of roast boar with a sauce so pungent it announces itself a full table length away. You know it will be good. You know you're hungry. But you also know that the real challenge isn't eating, it's being seen eating the correct amount. Historians still argue how much of this was performative versus practical. After all, some of these guests might not eat again until tomorrow night, but appearances were everything. To be seen licking fingers, gnawing bones, or, heaven forbid, mopping sauce with a handful of bread could shatter your reputation. Instead, you must perform restraint. You carve your portion into tiny bites. You chew slowly, reverently. You don't go back for seconds. You never ask for more. And you never, ever pick at someone else's plate, no matter how amazing their portion looks. You glance around to check how others are managing. At the high table, the lady of the house is the image of elegancy. She eats maybe 3 bites total, pauses for polite conversation, and rests her hands delicately in her lap. The lord eats more heartily, but even he leaves a noticeable chunk of boar uneaten, a subtle signal that he's full of both meat and virtue. Farther down the table, though, things get a bit sloppier. A merchant 3 seats over is trying to appear restrained, but keeps accidentally scooping more sauce. A knight nearby is chewing with too much enthusiasm. You watch as the steward walks past both of them with narrowed eyes and makes a tiny mark on his wax tablet. Yes, There are notes being taken. You glance at your own trencher. A few neat slices remain. Enough to suggest satisfaction. You decide. Now's the moment. You rest your knife. You place your hands gently to the side. You sit back, straight but relaxed, and dab your mouth with what you hope is aristocratic melancholy. Moderation achieved, until your neighbor offers you his remaining portion with a smile. It's a test. You shake your head politely. Smile. Say nothing. And he nods in quiet approval. Well done. You have just passed the will you take seconds if they're offered challenge. That one's sneaky, but food isn't the only thing that must be consumed modestly. Conversation too must follow the rule of moderation. You've been quiet most of the evening. This is good. But now someone higher up the table turns to you and asks a question. Something harmless like, "What's your opinion on goose?" You must answer, but carefully. No loud opinions, no jokes at the expense of clergy, and certainly no stories involving chamber pots. Instead, you reply with a short, clever comment. I find goose reliable, if slightly overconfident. It lands. A few smiles, no glares, you're safe. You're part of the conversation now, but you don't dominate it. You've demonstrated wit and moderation. A rare feat. The rule always is leave people wondering if you're more interesting than you appear. Back to the food. The bore is being cleared. The trenchers are heavier now, soaked in sauce, softening at the edges. You know they'll be taken soon, destined for the monastery or the servants' quarters. You don't touch them again. You let your portion lie undisturbed. That's the final cue of a well-mannered eater, knowing when to stop. As the next course is prepared, something light, possibly fish, possibly something pretending to be fish, you take a moment to breathe. You've made it through one of the hardest parts of the feast. You've demonstrated the holy trinity of good dining: discretion, restraint, and excellent napkin usage. Now the music starts again. A lute, maybe a flute, joins in. The conversation picks up. The wine flows. People begin to relax, but not you, not fully. Because you know this moment, this gentle lull, is when the weirdness usually begins. The lute strikes a cheery little trill, and the room takes a collective breath. Plates have been cleared. Fingers have been dabbed. You survived the bore and the unspoken battle for moderation. But now, as you glance down the length of the long, flickering hall, you begin to hear a soft rhythm, tap, tap, scuffle, tap. Someone is coming, or something, and then they appear. Entertainers. Yes, because of course, no medieval dinner worth its roasted quail is complete without a side of live entertainment. Not just minstrels or singers, not just dancers. No, tonight the Lord has spared no expense. You're about to witness dinner theatre in its most literal form. The first to enter is a jester, bells at his ankles, painted face. He bows so deeply, his hat touches the ground, then straightens with a yelp. One of the bells has tangled in his hair. Everyone laughs, not a roaring laugh, but a socially acceptable chuckle. The lady of the house claps once, delicately. This is her approval. Next, two small dogs, yes, actual dogs, in matching blue capes, trot into the room. One is perched on the back of a pig. The pig is wearing a wreath of marigolds. The other dog barks twice, then performs a twirl on command. The pig grunts and keeps walking. You blink. No one seems surprised. Because this is normal. Historians still debate the regularity of these dinner distractions, whether they were daily occurrences or just for feasts. But records survive of everything from dancing bears to tightrope walking goats. Entertainment wasn't optional, it was expected, especially once the wine had softened everyone's mood. And that's just the animals. Sometimes it's fire breathers, sometimes it's a local singer whose ballads make everyone suddenly nostalgic for their first cousin's wedding. Occasionally, it's a group of acrobats who do flip so close to the hearth that everyone politely pretends not to fear spontaneous combustion. Tonight, you get a juggler. He enters juggling 4 apples, then 5, then 2 apples and a ladle, then 1 apple and a live toad, which causes a ripple of surprise and some polite gasps. He grins, bows. The toad hops away with as much dignity as a dinner-crashing amphibian can manage. A servant retrieves it quietly. You're trying to focus on your wine, but the juggler has now moved behind your bench and is balancing the spoon on his nose. You sip carefully. Applause erupts when the spoon doesn't fall, but you're more focused on not choking. You dab your mouth and nod as if you see spoon-nose miracles every day. There's a lull. Then, music. A group of 3 musicians, one with a fiddle, one with a tambourine, and one whose instrument you don't recognize, possibly a sheep-related invention, begin to play a lively tune. Now something remarkable happens. People start clapping in rhythm. Not loudly, but in that reserved, dignified way that says, yes, I have hands, and yes, they approve of this lute solo. And then, just when you think it can't get weirder, a man dressed as a tree walks in. No explanation. He simply strolls through the hall, branches strapped to his arms, leaves in his hair, face painted green. He nods solemnly at each table. The lady of the house gives him a small wave. Someone hands him a dried fig. He accepts it with great ceremony. And then he exits. You never find out who he was. You ask no questions, that's the rule. Entertainment at a medieval dinner is equal parts distraction and diplomacy. A jester might mock a guest gently. If they laugh, all is well. If they take offense, well, now the host knows who to not invite next time. It's a subtle form of court intelligence gathering hidden behind slapstick and soup. Sometimes the entertainment is a riddle contest, sometimes a poetry duel, occasionally a long and mildly terrifying story told by a bearded man with suspiciously good teeth. You never know what you'll get, but there's one constant. It interrupts the eating. And that's deliberate because in the medieval view, food isn't just about nourishment. It's about sequence, about pacing. You don't just shovel in 3 courses and stagger to bed. You pause, you digest, you reflect. You watch a pig in a hat do a circle and remember that you're refined. Even the timing of the entertainment is part of the etiquette. It usually arrives between courses, just after something heavy, just before something sweet. That way, you're not eating during the juggling, and you're not sleeping through the final toast, and you've passed another test. You didn't laugh too loudly, you didn't ignore the performers, and you didn't try to pet the pig. The man with the fiddle takes a final bow. The spoon juggler winks at you, he's missing a tooth, and exits through the same curtain the walking tree used. The dogs trot out behind him, one of them now carrying the toad in its mouth like a prize. The hall quiets. The steward reappears. He looks at the guests, gives a half nod, and disappears toward the kitchen. The next course is coming, likely a custard, or maybe that swan in a cloak of saffron paste you've heard rumors about, but you're ready. You've learned the rules. You've learned to expect the unexpected. You straighten your napkin. You adjust your posture. You lift your goblet, not to drink, just to hold it elegantly, and you wait. The pig, by the way, has found a corner near the fire and settled down with a sigh, and if that's not a perfect summary of this entire evening, you don't know what is. The music fades, the pig snores softly. The jester has vanished behind the same velvet curtain that swallows most things in this strange ceremonial hall. And just as your curiosity begins to settle, the smell hits you. It's sharp, oily, faintly metallic, and very, very fishy. The next course has arrived. At first you think perhaps someone left a herring too close to the fire. But no, the fish is intentional. It is the main attraction of this particular course, and it comes with a complex web of rules, taboos, and ecclesiastical oversight that would make even a bishop second-guess his carp. A large silver tray is brought out. Upon it lies a pike, eyes still intact, mouth agape, garnished with sprigs of herbs and, somehow, an unsettling smile. A murmur goes through the room, not of disapproval, but recognition. It is Friday, after all, and that means no meat. Not unless you want to tangle with the church. You've entered the domain of forbidden foods, and the medieval world takes that line very seriously. Eating improperly is not just poor manners, it's a sin, one that might land you in the confessional or worse, on the wrong end of a barbed sermon next Sunday. So what counts as improper? That depends on the day, the region, and whether the kitchen staff is feeling crafty. Fish, always allowed on fast days. Meat from hoofed animals, forbidden. Poultry, usually also forbidden, though. Beavers, well, here's where it gets strange. Because of their scaly tails and semi-aquatic lifestyle, beavers were, at one point, classified as fish by certain medieval theologians. This meant they could be eaten on Fridays, as could barnacle geese whose nesting habits were so mysterious to some Europeans that they were believed to grow on trees, therefore not real birds, therefore allowed. Historians still argue whether these rulings were genuine theological interpretations or convenient culinary loopholes. Either way, the lines between holy and hungry were often blurred. Tonight, though, the fish is real, the day is devout, and everyone knows the rules. You'll be eating pike. You won't be sneaking a sausage. You're not about to get excommunicated over poultry. The fish is placed gently before you and your trencher mate. Its smell is, let's call it, assertive. Its skin glistens. You exchange a glance that says, "We will be brave, together." Then you begin. You use your knife, not your fingers. Fish, despite its slipperiness, demands delicacy. You slice a sliver, avoiding the eye, and raise it to your mouth. It's fine, salty, slightly gelatinous, probably overcooked, but entirely legally sanctioned. And that's the real goal here. You eat slowly, moderately. You remember the earlier lessons. Small bites, no slurping, no sudden movements. The napkin on your shoulder absorbs the occasional dribble. The dog under the table sniffs the air and then loses interest. The room is quieter now, fewer jokes, fewer glances. This is the serious course. The one where everyone reflects on their conduct and pretends they didn't once eat pheasant on a saint's day while travelling. And while the church prescribes these rules, it's the hosts and stewards who enforce them. Your host tonight seems devout, but not zealous. He allows generous portions of fish. He's served several vegetable dishes, lentils, turnips, even a curious puree that might be mashed peas with regret, and all of it conforms. But not all hosts are so careful. There's a famous tale of a dinner in Burgundy where a lord tried to sneak in a rabbit stew under the pretense that it was large river trout. Unfortunately, the stew still had ears. The bishop present was not amused. The Lord's penance involved several weeks of fasting and a public apology that involved kneeling in a turnip field while being mildly insulted by monks. You, mercifully, faced no such scandal. Still you remain alert. Because not all forbidden foods are obviously meat. Eggs, butter, milk, these too are off limits on strict fasting days, which means any custards or sauces tonight must be oil-based, often using almond milk or other plant-based substitutes. Yes, medieval cuisine did plant-based before it was trendy. Not by choice, of course, by decree. And while the rules are meant to reflect spiritual discipline, they've spawned an entire genre of culinary creativity, recipes designed to look like meat but aren't, eel pies that resemble mutton, lentil loaves shaped like roast goose. One particularly infamous cookbook includes a fish moulded from rice paste and dyed to look like veal. You remember hearing someone mention that the almond milk blancmange from last week looked so much like chicken that 3 guests wept in confusion. That's the game. You don't just eat. You navigate. You interpret. You chew and wonder, am I sinning right now? Or just being fed very convincing beans? Tonight, though, things are straightforward. Fish, lentils, vegetable fritters, fried in what you hope is oil and not secret butter. You finish your portion, you dab your mouth, you sit back, you followed the rules. A servant clears the fish bones, bowing slightly. The table is tidied once again. New trenchers are being brought, dry, thick, ready for the next act. And as you wait for the next course, you find yourself wondering, was that fish actually good, or do I just feel morally superior? Either way, your conscience and your breath are now fully cleansed. You've done well, you didn't eat a barnacle goose by accident. You chewed your pike without wincing too visibly. And best of all, you didn't ask where the sauce came from. It's safer that way. Now, as your trencher is cleared for what must be the 4th or 5th time this evening, you watch as a new figure enters the room. Not a server, not a jester, but a man carrying a knife so large it could be mistaken for a ceremonial sword. The carver. You've heard of them, of course. Every noble household worth its salt, and that salt better be above your head, remember, has a designated food carver, trained not only in slicing meat, but in turning the act into a kind of performance. Carving in the medieval world is not just practical, it's art, and there are rules, so many rules. First of all, the carver does not serve you. You are far too far down the table. No, the carver is for the high table, for the lord and lady, for their honored guests. You get what remains, but you watch, and what a spectacle it is. He steps forward, wearing fine sleeves rolled just enough to show confidence without looking common. His knife is sharpened to a whisper. And the object of his art tonight? A peacock. Fully cooked, garnished, and yes, redressed in its own feathers. You're not hallucinating. This is real. The bird, previously roasted and skinned, is now reassembled in full glory, its iridescent feathers spread out behind it like a heraldic fan. Its neck has been propped upright with a wire. Its beak is polished, its eyes are glass, and now the carver goes to work. With delicate precision, he cuts into the breast, revealing pale, steaming meat beneath. He slices thin, even, rhythmic. It's mesmerizing. He doesn't speak. No one does. Even the steward watches in silent approval. Carving was considered a noble profession, often taught to young pages as part of their gentlemanly education. There were whole instruction manuals on how to carve a boar, a goose, a capon, or even a porpoise. Yes, porpoise. Let's not get into it. Each animal had its own technique, and not just how to cut, but how to gesture while cutting. There were flourishes, pauses, angled wrist movements. You weren't just feeding people, you were demonstrating control, mastery, and ideally that you'd never used your knife for anything so common as peeling turnips. Historians still debate whether these elaborate moves had any practical benefit or were pure theatre. Some claim it was to avoid embarrassment. Cutting into a bird the wrong way might squirt juices onto someone's silk sleeves. Others argue that the cutting was secondary to the spectacle, the ritual of restraint amid indulgence. Tonight, it's definitely the latter. The carver now moves on to the next bird, a goose stuffed with another bird, possibly a pigeon, which is itself stuffed with something grainy and aromatic. A small fruit tart is then inserted delicately into the goose's mouth. You aren't sure why, you do not ask. Occasionally, carvers double as announcers, calling out the name of each dish and its contents as they slice. In some banquets they rhyme, in others they sing. But tonight's carver is silent, professional, swift. You suspect he once worked in a royal household, or maybe a monastery with really enthusiastic Sunday feasts. Now and then, he glances toward the lord of the manor, awaiting a nod. Sometimes the nod comes after just one slice. Other times the carver is directed to carve deeper, offer a different piece, or rearrange the feathers for dramatic effect. You're watching an improvised ballet of blades and bird. A servant begins walking along the table with the freshly carved meat, but only to those seated above the salt. You try not to look disappointed. Your trencher remains empty, but then surprisingly, a plate arrives for you. It's not peacock, it's not goose, but it's something rich, beef in a heavy red sauce, likely a reward for sitting through the fish course with such grace. You nod your thanks. You don't ask what part of the animal it is. The knife has now returned to its sheath. The carver bows. The room, still quiet, breathes again. The musicians resume a low tune, and conversation trickles back in. There is something deeply medieval about this moment, the blend of ritual, food, and power. The carver has sliced not just meat, but attention. He's shown everyone where the center is. And in a world where status is measured in proximity and portions, the man with the knife is not just a servant, he's a messenger. He tells you with every cut, you are welcome here, but not equal, and you accept this. That's the contract of the feast. You turn back to your plate. The beef is tender, if overly spiced. You chew politely. You don't ask for more. You dab your mouth with the napkin that's somehow still miraculously perched on your shoulder. The dog under the table stares at you. You drop a small bite. He is grateful. He winks, you may be imagining that. You glance again toward the high table. The peacock is gone. Only its feathers remain, arranged in a fan behind the lord's chair. A trophy. A warning. A decoration. No one seems quite sure, but for you it's simple. Another course survived. The meat, the carving, the hierarchy, all sliced cleanly. You adjust your posture. You sip. You wait. Dessert is coming, and with it, a new set of rules. You've survived peacock. Not just the eating, or in your case the watching, but the symbolism of it all. The feathers, the flair, the careful knife work, and the faint scent of saffron still hanging in the air like a rumour. And just as you think the feast might be winding down, the dog under your bench lifts his head and sniffs the air with renewed interest. He knows. You know, it's dessert time, and not just apple pie or a few biscuits. No, This is medieval dessert, a final course of spectacle, sugar, and sometimes things that feel more like a dare than a treat. You sit up straighter. Your napkin is still in place, a miracle. Your trencher has been replaced with something cleaner, firmer, and, dare you say, almost pleasant smelling. The steward gives a subtle nod and then it begins. Servants emerge with trays bearing elaborate, jewel-toned jellies shaped like castles, fish, and mythical beasts. One quivering pile has been moulded into the form of a boar's head. Another resembles a bishop's hat. You pretend not to notice the irony. Next comes a towering marchpane sculpture, marzipan, that glorious almond paste, moulded into a replica of the manor itself, complete with tiny trees, sugar windows, and what looks like a candied version of the steward standing by the gates. Someone at the upper table chuckles. The steward does not. And then the pièce de résistance rolls in. Au pétou, swan, not just any swan, a roast swan, feathers restored, beak lacquered, body wrapped in a thin pastry shell like armor. It glides across the table on a silver board, propped up with invisible wire, as if still ready to hiss and attack a particularly rude guest. You blink. You are not hallucinating. There's a long tradition of swan as noble meat, technically edible, rarely delicious, and mostly served to make a point, a powerful point, a look at what I can roast and then bedazzle point. Historians still argue whether these showpieces were actually consumed or mostly admired. Some claim guests were encouraged to take a bite, others say they were paraded for effect and removed before any chewing occurred. Tonight, you suspect it's a bit of both. At your end of the table, you're given something more practical: poached pears in spiced wine, a bit of almond tart, and a lump of what might be sugar-dusted bread pudding. You are not disappointed. This is real food. Sweet, warm, safe. You take a bite of the pear. It's tender, fragrant, swimming in cinnamon and cloves. A bite of tart, delicate, crumbly, not too sweet. Someone at the table murmurs approval. Dessert, it seems, is the one part of the meal where everyone is briefly, quietly happy. And yet, the rules persist. Don't eat too quickly. You've learned that already. But during dessert, the expectation becomes even more pronounced. A bite, a pause, a sip of wine, a compliment, gently delivered. If someone near you made a particularly nice marzipan flower, you glance to your right. A woman dabs her lips, sets her spoon down, and sighs just audibly enough to indicate she's content, but not indulgent. Masterful. You try it. Bite, dab, sigh. You think you nailed it. Then comes the moment you didn't expect. Subtly, the conversation begins to shift. For most of the meal, talk has been light: weather, family news, the occasional scandal about someone fainting during Mass. But now, over dessert, the tone changes. Politics creep in. A man 2 places down mutters something about a neighbouring baron's tax levy. Another responds with a quiet joke about wool prices and bandits. Even the lord at the high table leans in, murmuring something to a guest, who then nods gravely while delicately chewing crystallized ginger. This, you now understand, is the real function of dessert. It's not just the final course, it's the conversational pivot point. When the food is safest, the stakes get highest because everyone is full, everyone is relaxed, the wine has done its work. And now, beneath the sugar and syrup, deals are being made. Alliances tested, disputes probed softly like a thumb pressing against a bruise. You stay quiet, but alert. You chew your tart like it contains secrets. You nod at the right moments. You do not, under any circumstances, join in. This is advanced etiquette, graduate level feasting. You're still mastering posture and spoon dab timing. Suddenly the steward appears again, this time with a bowl. It's comfits, tiny, sugar-coated fennel or anise seeds. Served at the very end, meant to aid digestion and signal that the meal, after 3 hours and 4,000 unspoken rules, is finally nearing its end. You take a few. Let them dissolve slowly on your tongue. They taste like something your apothecary would prescribe, but they are sweet and symbolic. Nearby, a man leans back too far and almost burps. Almost. He catches it. The woman beside him raises one eyebrow. He offers her the rest of his tart. She accepts. Balance is restored. The room is different now, looser somehow, but still structured. The desserts may be soft, but the rules are still sharp. You feel it, the beginning of the end of the feast. Candles are burning lower. Jesters are no longer juggling. The pig has disappeared. You suspect it's asleep under the tablecloth. The dog yawns beside your boot. Someone is singing softly. Too softly to hear the words. Possibly Latin. Possibly nonsense. And still, you chew your last bite of pear like it's part of a prayer. Because it is, in a way. The prayer of a guest who has eaten well, abided by rules, and avoided all major offences. You did not sneeze on the Lord's wife. You did not reach for the salt. You did not confuse a fish for a forbidden fowl. You are full. You are safe. You are finally sugared into submission. The sugar has settled in your bloodstream like a gentle lullaby. The conversation around you softens to murmurs and lazy chuckles. Candlelight flickers lower. You glance upward and notice a thin ribbon of smoke from a guttering torch curling toward the timbered ceiling. And though the table still holds the scent of pears and wine and almond, something has shifted. It's nearly over, but you can't just get up and leave, not unless you're eager to become a cautionary tale, because as with every part of this evening, leaving the table requires ritual. First, though, comes one last formality. Grace after meals. Yes, again. A monk in long grey robes rises from the far end of the room. He clears his throat, not loudly, but with the quiet authority of someone used to commanding attention without raising his voice. His hands are folded. His face is serene. And then he begins to chant. Not the long drawn-out Latin of pre-dinner. This is shorter. A benediction, a note of thanks, something about the blessings of bread and the moderation of appetite. You catch only fragments. Benedicamus, panem nostrum, et no custodit. Everyone is still. Even the dog seems to pause mid-ear scratch. You bow your head, gently, respectfully, while keeping one eye on the monk's sleeves to make sure this isn't one of those long versions. It isn't. After a few rhythmic lines, he closes with a soft "Amen," echoed around the room by a dozen mouths at different paces. Then it's silence. And then motion. Servants begin their final sweep, not collecting dishes, but collecting people. It's a visual cue the feast is truly finished. Guests begin to rise, but only when the Lord does. You wait. You sit perfectly still. Your feet tingle a little from having been tucked neatly beneath the bench for nearly 3 hours, but you ignore that. You watch the head of the table, and then it happens. The Lord stands. Not quickly, not dramatically, but everyone sees it. Everyone rises. Now the final etiquette gauntlet begins. how to leave without looking like you desperately want to leave. There's a precise order, of course. The higher your status, the sooner you may exit. If you're above the salt, you rise, bow to the host and hostess, and may even receive a gentle clasp of hands or a murmured farewell. If you're below the salt, like you wait. You let others go, you observe. You do not rush. You do not thank loudly. You certainly do not burp and stretch and declare you need a nap. Instead, you offer a small bow, not a deep one, that's for church or punishment. A shallow bow, just enough to convey gratitude without desperation. You nod at your fellow diners. You smile faintly. And you begin to back away from the table. Yes, back away. Turning your back too quickly is seen as irreverent. You move slowly, gracefully, as if walking away from an altar which, in some ways, this table has been. Behind you, the dog follows. You pretend not to notice. Your hands are clasped in front of you. Your napkin, no longer needed, has somehow vanished, probably whisked away by one of those stealthy servants who appear only at key plot points. Your trencher is gone, your cup is gone, only your dignity remains, fragile but intact. You pass the steward. He gives you a once-over, no visible stains, no unruly posture. He nods, barely, and marks something in his little wax tablet. You exhale. Now comes the final gesture. Thanking the host. Yes, again. Even if you've done so earlier in the evening, there is one more round of appreciation required. You approach the host with a short, quiet compliment. Something like, "The goose was extraordinary, my lord," or "I've never seen a swan so nobly dressed." The goal isn't flattery, it's recognition. You're acknowledging not just the food, but the performance, the order, the social scaffolding that kept 40 people from devolving into wild stew-eating goblins for 3 hours. You deliver your line. The lord responds with a vague but warm, "You honor me." His lady nods once, her expression calm but exhausted. You bow again, this time deeper. Then you are finally allowed to turn. The doors open, not flung open, eased. A rush of cooler air hits your face, sweet, damp, tinged with hay and wood smoke. You step through. And now, outside the great hall, everything changes. Your posture softens, your breath returns to your chest instead of your throat. You look at your hands and realize they haven't moved freely in hours. You flex your fingers. It feels dangerous. You made it. You survived. You played your part. You dined like a noble, or at least you convincingly pretended to. And despite the awkward fish, the jester's spoon nose, the dangerous proximity to a peacock's wing, and your brief moment of fork-related doubt, you weren't removed from the hall. You weren't demoted to the hayloft. You weren't given the side-eye by the steward's quill. You feel good. Someone walks past you and says, "Until next feast." You nod wisely. You have no idea who they are. Behind you, the heavy doors shut with a dull, definitive thud. The feast is over, but the rules remain, etched into your memory, smeared into the edge of your sleeve, whispered into the very folds of your brain. Tomorrow, you will wake up with a vague headache, a faint scent of clove still clinging to your clothes, and an overwhelming urge to sit up straighter while chewing toast. But for now, you walk slowly, Toward the stables, past the cold stone walls and the flickering torches under the enormous star-choked sky. A dog trots beside you, possibly your friend, possibly someone else's. You survived medieval dinner, and that's more than most guests can say. The starlight outside is sharp and clear, far brighter than it seemed when you first arrived. But that's probably just your eyes adjusting, not to the dark, but to the absence of spectacle. There are no feathered pies here, no men dressed as trees, no sculpted almond castles or judgmental stewards tracking your every chew, just air, cold, still, slightly damp. You inhale it like medicine, but before you can disappear into the night, a stable boy passes you with a nod and a quiet, "They're in the garden if you're going." You blink. The garden? Ah, of course, the post-dinner stroll. You thought the feast was over, but no. In the grand tradition of medieval pacing, between courses, between conversations, between awkwardly held eye contact, there's a final, optional, but subtly expected ritual. Walking slowly through some hedges while digesting. You follow the path. Torches have been set along the stone walkway, their flames small and swaying. The garden unfolds in geometric patterns of boxwood, gravel, and rose bushes that have long since given up for the season. At night it smells of damp leaves and crushed mint. You walk carefully, trying not to trip over anything important, like a route or your reputation. Ahead of you, a few guests are already meandering, arms clasped behind their backs in thoughtful postures. A soft murmur of conversation rises. Nothing. Heavy, just murmured thoughts on the music or who fainted during last year's feast. This is the social exhale. And though you're technically free to leave, doing so too quickly would be noticed, especially now. Walking is part of the rhythm. You've eaten, you've praised, you've bowed. Now you must stroll. You join a small group by a low stone wall. One man is recounting a tale about an eel pie shaped like a bishop's hat. You nod politely. You've just lived through something stranger, but now is not the time to compare weird dinners. Instead, you comment on the weather. A little colder than expected, but mercifully dry. Someone agrees. Someone else adds that last year's feast was held in a tent due to roof repairs and a hawk tried to fly off with the pie. There's laughter. It's gentle, real. This, you begin to understand, is where the masks start to loosen. Inside the hall, everyone was a performance. Here, in the moonlit garden, people are more themselves. The knight who said nothing at dinner suddenly has opinions about plum wine. The noblewoman with perfect posture snorts when she laughs. Even the steward, yes, the steward, is walking among the guests, nodding, offering a polite word here and there, his ledger tucked away. But don't mistake this for freedom. This is still etiquette, just the softer kind. The garden talk is strategic, casual, but intentional. It's where minor apologies are made. Sorry I reached past your trencher. Didn't mean to sneeze in your direction. Hope you enjoyed the fish, even if it wasn't technically a fish. It's also where alliances are formed, where someone might drop a hint about a new inheritance, or suggest a marriageable cousin, or inquire ever so softly about wool tariffs. And for you, it's a chance to be remembered as more than the guest who didn't spill gravy. A chance to be quietly admired for your restraint, your posture, your perfectly timed napkin dabbing. You pass a fountain. It's dry for winter, but someone has placed a wreath over the edge. A few coins shimmer in the basin. You drop one in because that's what you do. Always participate, never dominate, and then you reach the edge of the garden. Some guests are leaving now, gently extracted from conversation, escorted by servants with lanterns. You nod your farewells, echo their compliments. You mention the almond tart again. It's a safe favorite. No one ever argues about the almond tart. As you walk back toward the guest quarters, possibly a barn, possibly a chilly guest wing, depending on your rank, you reflect on the night. You didn't eat too much, you didn't offend anyone, you might even be invited back. You also learned that forks are suspicious, that beavers are technically fish, but only if you're creative, with your theology. And that desserts can involve architecture and bird taxidermy. You didn't expect to see a swan in armor. You didn't expect to share a trencher with someone who quoted the Psalms between bites of pickled cabbage. But here you are. You glance up at the stars. They look sharper now. Maybe because your mind is finally softening after all the rules and rituals. And there's one more thing you realize. Despite the formality, despite the unspoken rules, despite the stiff benches and twitchy dogs, you've just been part of something deeply human. A shared meal, a ritual, a performance, a temporary society constructed in one long room, with meat and manners and meaning braided together under candlelight. You step quietly through the doorway of your lodgings, loosen your belt just slightly, no one's watching now, and sit down on a wooden bench that creaks like an old friend. The fire crackles. A servant brings you water, maybe bread. You smile, you've eaten, you've walked, you've bowed, you've survived. And tomorrow, if someone asks, you'll simply say, "Dinner was lovely, and that will be enough." The warmth of the small guest chamber is a balm after the chill of the garden. The fire glows low, just enough to chase off the damp. You lower yourself onto the straw mattress, not too fast. Your stomach is still sorting through the last 5 courses, and take a moment to reflect, and that's when you hear it. A distant belch. It echoes faintly through the stone walls, long and reverberant, followed by the unmistakable sound of someone trying to turn it into a cough. Then silence. Then soft laughter. Oh, that one guest. Every feast has one. You saw him earlier, too loud during the loving cup, too enthusiastic with the pike. And now, long after the meal has ended, he's still echoing through the manor like a minor ghost. You smile, quietly grateful that it isn't you making post-feast headlines. Because you, dear listener, played the game well, but not everyone does. And so, with your feet up, your boots off, and your belt loosened, precisely 1 notch, any more, and you risk judgment from the housekeeper tomorrow, let's revisit some of the unspoken dangers of medieval dining one more time, for your future reference or survival. First, greed. Nothing is more socially perilous than appearing too eager. Reaching across the table, scooping extra sauce, finishing a dish before it's made it halfway down the line, any of these actions could result in whispered disapproval. Not that anyone would confront you directly. Oh no, you'd just find yourself seated further from the salt next time, or perhaps next to the chamber pot corridor. Second, excessive praise. It sounds polite, right? But in this world, overpraising a dish is interpreted as either sarcasm or ignorance. This eel, stew is divine, must be delivered with the subtle tone of a monk discussing parchment grain texture. Otherwise you sound like a novice, or worse, someone who's never had eel before. Third, insufficient gratitude. A tricky one. You must thank the host, but not too warmly. Nothing theatrical, nothing rhyming. A single comment, short, sincere. Perhaps referencing a specific dish, the quince pie was particularly fine, will suffice. More than that, and people assume you're angling for a job, or a marriage. Historians still debate whether these conventions were enforced by formal instruction or learned by brutal trial and error. Most likely, it was both. In fact, entire manuals existed, conduct books for young nobles, detailing how to behave at table, how to fold a napkin, and when to laugh at a joke, tip, only after someone above the salt has already laughed. One of the best-known guides, the Book of the Civilized Man, was written in the 13th century by a clergyman who seemed to think dinner guests were barely human. His rules included: don't scratch your head at table, don't blow your nose into your fingers, don't stare into your neighbor's cup, don't clean your teeth with your knife. Yes, that had to be said. And while some of these rules sound obvious, others were more performative. For instance, guests were expected to pretend not to notice unpleasant things. If the meat was undercooked, eat around it. If the wine was sour, sip politely. If a rat scurried under the table, admire the drapery, because the highest expression of etiquette was not flawless form, it was restraint. And you? You showed restraint all night long. You did not overdrink. You did not panic at the sight of feathered dessert. You did not faint when the jester placed a spoon on your shoulder and called it a blessing from the Duke of Pudding. You simply nodded, dabbed, chewed. It's worth noting that some noble houses took this even further, expecting guests to observe the eating habits of their host and match them exactly. If the host paused, so did you. If the host skipped the stew, you let yours go cold. If the host dropped his trencher on the floor and declared it a test of faith, well, let's hope that didn't happen. These mimicry customs were particularly intense at royal courts, where being in sync with the monarch could make or break your entire social standing. Some courtiers practiced in advance, literally rehearsing their chewing to match the rhythm of their king, which makes your modest, well-timed bites tonight all the more admirable. You shift slightly in bed now, the mattress straw rustling. Outside, the night deepens. Somewhere, an owl hoots, possibly judging someone's choice of table wine, and you realize something delightful. The rules are behind you. You don't need to remember how to lift your goblet. You don't have to calculate whether it's appropriate to sigh between bites. You don't even need to look dignified while slipping your feet under the covers. You're free. But before your mind drifts fully into sleep, you do something almost involuntary. You straighten your spine. You adjust your hands. You close your mouth. A leftover reflex from the table. The etiquette lingers like the scent of cloves on your sleeves. Because once you've dined like a medieval noble, a part of you remains at the table. Alert. Upright. Dab ready. Eventually, of course, you'll relax. But not quite yet. You hear a rooster crow, too early surely, probably a confused one. Probably someone fed it jelly shaped like St. Martin. You smile, and somewhere in the manor, the steward is already reviewing his notes, planning the next feast, adjusting the salt placement, sharpening the knives. But you've done your part. You've eaten in style, you've dined with dignity, and now you rest. Morning comes softly, slipping into your chamber like an apologetic guest. There's no rooster this time. He must have realized his mistake. But the muffled sounds of servants waking, horses snorting, and someone somewhere dropping a ladle into a bucket of water mark the start of the day. You open your eyes and you sit up straight. Immediately. Reflex. It's as if your spine still believes it's in the feast hall. You chuckle softly and let yourself relax back into a more human position. Your clothes from last night are draped over the nearby stool, still faintly dusted with breadcrumbs and the ghost of clove-scented wine. You brush them off. You smell faintly of almond, wood smoke, and mild terror. In short, you smell like success. You step outside and blink at the pale gold light stretching across the courtyard. Breakfast isn't for hours, and even then, it won't be a production. No swans. No jesters, just bread, cheese, and a hot cup of ale or watered wine to get the blood flowing. A return to simplicity. But as you walk slowly toward the stables, your mind lingers on everything you've just been through. The clinking cups, the impossible posture, the salt, oh, the salt. It sat on the table like a tiny, judgmental emperor, separating nobility from nobodies. You realize now that dining in the medieval world was not simply about food. It was about being seen. And it still is. Even now, in your thoroughly unfeathered morning tunic, you nod politely to a passing merchant who gave you precisely one polite glance last night. His nod is slightly deeper today. Just enough to say, "You didn't embarrass yourself. Congratulations." And it makes sense. In a world without Instagram, business cards, or elevator pitches, dinner was your resume. How you ate showed how you lived. Were you controlled, refined, reliable under pressure from a pigeon pie? Could you laugh just enough without snorting? Could you survive 3 hours of food performance without once scratching your nose with a knife handle? It was never about perfection. It was about harmony, fitting in, not showing off. And the rewards were subtle, but real. You notice it again when you enter the small hall where a few guests are sipping hot drinks. The best seats near the fire are taken, of course, but one opens, and someone gestures toward you. You sit. Warmth creeps into your toes. You're handed a piece of bread and some soft cheese wrapped in a leaf. Someone offers you their knife. You accept. You're not being tested now. You chew. No one's watching your posture. You're safe. And then someone new enters the room. They're fresh, dressed a bit too brightly. Their tunic is a little too crisp. They move too quickly, make too much eye contact. They grab their bread too soon. Their knife clatters on the bench. A few heads turn. A servant notices. You suppress a smile, not smugly, just with the knowing look of someone who has been through the fire, the fish course, and the forkless panic. You've earned this peace. The new guest eventually finds their place. No disaster. Just mild corrections from a steward, a nod here, a pointed look there. You almost feel sympathy. Almost because last night, that was you, and now you're something more dangerous than just a competent diner. You're experienced. You know how to move through a feast without disrupting the fabric of etiquette. You understand that silence is power, that moderation is admired, and that the true seat of honor isn't above the salt. It's in the memory of the host. Somewhere you're sure a ledger was updated. Your name was marked. Polite, quiet, knew when to dab. And that means when the next feast comes, and there will be another, you might just be seated 2 spots closer to the high table. You might be offered the wine that hasn't been watered. You might, just maybe, be granted a smile from the Lord's wife that doesn't feel like polite confusion. Or even better, someone might ask you a question. Your opinion at the high table, because once you know the rules, once they live in your bones, don't touch your face, don't ask for salt, never eat faster than the bishop. You become something else, not just a guest, a participant, and maybe one day you'll host. You'll decide where the salt goes, who gets the carved boar, who gets seated next to the pig in a cape jester, who gets the trencher with the best corner for for mopping, and when that day comes, you'll remember everything you learned, every unspoken rule, every small victory, every silently observed elbow infraction. But for now, you sit by the fire. Your bread is warm. The cheese is sharp. The ale is slightly too flat, but it's morning, and your standards are blissfully lower. You've dined, you've endured, you've earned your seat in the quiet morning after. The fire crackles softly beside you, casting orange shadows along the wooden beams overhead. The bread in your hand is plain, none of last night's gilded crusts or saffron-dusted pastries, but it's satisfying in its simplicity. You take another bite and let the quiet of the morning soak in. And yet, as you chew, your mind drifts back, not to the food, but to the children at the feast. Not many, but they were there. Small, serious-faced creatures with clean hands, stiff collars, and expressions of intense concentration. Because for children in a noble household, a banquet is not dinner, it's training. You remember one in particular, a boy of about 10, seated midway up the table, probably the son of a lesser noble. He barely touched his food, but his posture could have been carved from oak. When his trencher partner dropped a spoon, he didn't flinch. When the jester tried to startle him, he smiled faintly and nodded, as if acknowledging a well-played move in a game of chess. He was practicing. In the medieval world, table manners were more than just social polish, they were survival skills. Entire texts were written for children with instructions like, do not lick your fingers before dipping into the salt. Do not blow upon your food like a bellows. Hold your spoon as a lady holds a quill, firm but not grasping. If you must cough, do so inwardly. You almost admire the severity. Some households began etiquette instruction as soon as a child could sit upright, not because they loved rules, but because they knew a child's future could hinge on their performance at a single dinner. Imagine being 10 years old and knowing that your lord uncle's approval of your carrot slicing technique might affect whether you're granted a pony or a pagehood or land. You watch the embers in the hearth shift and spark. You imagine the child at last night's table, still in his feast tunic, standing in front of a polished mirror somewhere in the manor, practicing a bow so smooth it could calm a bishop. Etiquette wasn't just about knowing the rules, it was about performing them until they became you. And it wasn't just children. Servants trained too. The cupbearer had to be trustworthy, the carver precise, the steward nearly omniscient. One wrong move and a guest might be insulted, or, worse, poisoned. In a court with enemies, paranoia was protocol. There were stories, possibly exaggerated, of lords testing their staff by slipping false instructions or odd table behaviors into the evening just to see who noticed. A servant who failed might be demoted, one who caught the mistake rewarded. Dinner was a crucible. You glance toward the door and notice a young girl brushing crumbs from a chair. She's humming to herself, tuneless, carefree. She can't be more than 8, but the way she wipes the table, folds the cloth, and straightens the goblet tells you she's watching, learning. You want to tell her, one day, someone will thank you for folding that napkin just right. One day you'll save a guest from scandal by placing the cup on the correct side. You'll remember which side of the salt they were meant to sit on, and that will be everything, but you say nothing. That's not your role. Instead, you sip your ale, and now your thoughts drift to that one guest again, the rule breaker, the loud chewer, the elbow leaner. Every feast has one, not because they're trying to ruin things, but because some people resist the script. And when they do, the whole room adjusts. Last night, you saw it happen. Someone belched mid-toast. Someone laughed too loudly at the wrong joke. Someone used a personal fork they brought from home, gilded and very Italian. Each time you saw the ripple, a pause, a glance, a correction, not direct, never confrontational, but real. That's the power of etiquette. It works best when no one has to enforce it. You think about how it spread too, through travelling lords, through marriage alliances, through etiquette books passed from cousin to cousin. A French duchess teaches her English daughter-in-law to dab her lips instead of wiping them. A German count insists that all sausages be sliced vertically because that's what Charlemagne did. Supposedly, the table becomes a tangle of borrowed traditions, localized customs, and deeply personal superstitions. Some guests pray before dessert. Others won't eat fish that's been roasted with rosemary. A few won't drink from cups touched by jesters. One man, legend says, insisted on dining under a portrait of St. Lawrence because he claimed it kept the eels in line. Etiquette grows like ivy everywhere, slowly, and with a mind of its own. And the oddest part? Despite the rigidity, despite the unspoken stress, people still loved these feasts, looked forward to them, longed for them. Why? Because they were more than food. They were theatre, a mirror, a moment to see and be seen, a chance to express who you were without saying a single word. You look down at your hands, clean now if a bit dry from the rosewater. Last night they gripped a goblet, cut soft slices from a pudding, gestured politely to a steward, folded in your lap like a monastic painting. They spoke for you, and as you stare into the embers, you realize you're already thinking ahead, wondering what the next feast will be like, who you'll be seated beside, whether you'll be closer to the salt, whether there will be another swan, whether you'll be the one who gently corrects a new guest when they try to stand too soon. You smile, because you're not just a guest anymore. You're a player in the slow, delicious game, and next time you'll be ready. Later that morning, long after the garden strolls and warm bread, you find yourself standing near the stables again, this time not as a guest, but simply as someone waiting. A few servants are brushing down horses, and a sleepy-looking dog, you suspect it's the same one from under your bench, rolls over in the hay with a sigh. You're not in a hurry. You're watching because something curious is happening. Last night's feast, though vanished from the table, is still unfolding in fragments all around you. Overheard comments, shared glances, muffled laughter behind doors, and now you realize the feast never really ends. It just drifts through the manor for a day or two like a polite ghost. You pass a pair of women by the kitchen doorway. One is recounting a moment when a guest accidentally dipped his spoon into his neighbor's soup. The other clutches her side from laughing. "He didn't even notice," she wheezes, "just kept stirring it." You move on before they see you grinning. Down the hall, a steward and the head cook are arguing in hushed tones about whether the almond tart had too much rosewater. "It was perfect," says the cook. "It tasted like soap," says the steward. "Expensive soap," the cook replies. Reputation, after all, is a dish best served over and over, and then you come upon something more surprising. A small group of scribes in the manor's anteroom, already writing down details of the event. You pause near the doorway. One is working on a letter to a cousin, something about the size of the swan, monstrous. The presence of a minor noble from the coast, awkward but polite. And The disappearance of someone's lapdog during the fourth course, presumed recovered, mildly sourced. Another scribe is transcribing notes for the household record. How many trenchers were used, which wines were served, who sat where. And, beside him, the steward's ledger. You recognize the cover. That little wax tablet he scribbled on throughout the evening has now blossomed into a permanent account. It contains the names of every guest, their behavior, their seating, and most importantly, their potential. You find your own name. It's there, neatly written. No red ink. A short note beside it. Observant, steady, knew their place. You feel strangely proud. As if you've been graded and passed, it dawns on you then that medieval dining was not just a performance, it was a test, and everyone, guest, servant, carver, jester, was being watched, recorded, assessed. Not maliciously, not cruelly, but systematically. Because households like this one were networks of favor, power, and memory. To feast here was to step onto a stage and hope that when the curtain fell, someone remembered your name with warmth, or at least without wincing. The aftermath of the meal is where the future is quietly shaped. You step away from the doorway, leave the scribes to their murmurs, and make your way back toward the front courtyard, where a few carts are being loaded. A merchant is saying his farewells, long, elaborate, florid. He bows to the Lord's Chamberlain, as if auditioning for sainthood. Another guest, a younger knight, is slipping away more quickly, perhaps aware he overdid it with the wine. And you take your time. You exchange one more nod with the steward. He gives a tighter nod than before, respectful, subtle, a tiny upgrade. From tolerated to remembered, it's a win. You think back to everything, the scented hand-washing ritual, the silent test of restraint, the silent politics of the salt, the gentle chaos of dessert, and of course, the ever-present threat of elbows. You realize the oddest truth of all, you didn't just survive the feast. You enjoyed it, genuinely. Not just the food, though that was a delightful puzzle of textures and decisions, but the structure, the rhythm, the feeling that for one long evening the world made sense through rules. In a time of uncertain roads, shifting loyalties, and religious upheaval, the dinner table was a world unto itself. A world with clear roles, clear rituals, clear expectations. And that clarity, strange as it seems, is what you'll miss most. You look back at the manor one last time. Its stone walls seem softer in the daylight. The high windows reflect the sky. You wonder who's already prepping for tonight's supper, who's scrubbing the goblets, who's polishing the loving cup. And you silently thank them all. You've dined among ghosts. You've sat beneath tapestries older than your hometown. You've nodded through jokes about archbishops. You've eaten a pear with your bare fingers and made it look dignified. And most importantly, you've been a guest in a world where dinner was never just dinner. It was diplomacy, theatre, confession, war, and in your case, perhaps, a little magic. You step onto the cart that will take you down the long road from the manor. The wheels creak. The dog follows for a few paces, then turns back. You wave. You swear it nods. And then you go. Back to your world. Back to simple meals. Back to chairs without rules. But when you sit down for dinner tonight, just bread, just stew, you'll notice it. Your back, a little straighter. Your knife, placed with care. Your drink, lifted just so, and for a moment, you'll be back there at the table. The cart rolls gently along the rutted road. creaking and bouncing as it carries you away from the manor, away from the hall of spectacle, salt, and quiet scrutiny. The wind picks up a bit, cool but not cruel. You pull your cloak tighter and glance back just once. The manor is nearly gone from view now, the banner's no longer visible. The only sign of last night's feast is the faint smell of smoke from the chimney and maybe, just maybe, the echo of a lute string caught in the wind. You're not sentimental, at least you weren't. But something about last night lingers in your chest like the ghost of a good story, and that's because the feast didn't just feed you. It transformed you. You're thinking more carefully about how you move, how you speak, even how you listen. You remember the man who chewed too loudly, the one who didn't wait for the prayer, the woman who dabbed her mouth with grace, so refined. It could calm a bear. They live in your memory now like lessons sewn into a coat. You pass a small cottage. A woman waves at you. She's hanging laundry, plain tunics, rough linens, nothing gold-threaded or wine-stained. Just daily life. You wave back, but your fingers still move like they're holding a goblet you're afraid to tilt too far. It'll fade. Eventually, or maybe it won't. Because while the rules of the feast were intense, sometimes absurd, they weren't entirely foreign. Not really. They were about attention, and that's something our world has never stopped needing. Whether in a banquet hall or a dinner party or a lunch break with co-workers, there's always some invisible choreography. Who speaks first? Who gets the best seat? Who reaches for the last piece of bread without looking desperate? The table is always a stage. The medieval banquet just had better costumes and a slightly higher chance of being stabbed. As the cart rounds a bend, the manor disappears for good. You look ahead now at the long stretch of dirt road leading to wherever you're going next. Maybe another town, maybe home, maybe a place where people eat fish on Fridays without consulting a priest. And yet, as the wheels turn, your mind is already editing the story. You'll tell someone about the peacock, the dancing pig, the jester with the spoon. You'll make them laugh. You'll make it sound like chaos, but you won't tell them about the real story, the quiet pressure in your shoulders, the way your napkin became a badge, the fear of drinking too soon, the pride of not being noticed. Because the truth is, dinner didn't change you. It revealed you. Who are you when no one explains the rules? Who are you when every move might be judged? Who are you when you're handed a trencher of gravy-slick bread and expected to share? Apparently, you're someone who adapts. You're someone who survives. The cart driver grunts. First time to that manor? He asks, not looking at you. You nod. Yes. Did they serve eel again? You laugh. Only twice. He grins, a pause, then he says, I used to work there, years ago. Kitchen boy. Nearly lost a finger to the peacock carver. Man had no depth perception. He chuckles. But I learned more at those feasts than I did in the church. You glance over. Like what? He shrugs. How to listen. How to wait. How to eat like you deserve it, even when you don't. That, you realize, is it exactly. Medieval dining was never just about rules. It was about worth. Not just your status, but how you carried yourself. Whether you made space for others. Whether you knew when to speak. Whether you could sit at a table full of lords and monks and jesters and manage to keep your soul in one piece. And somehow, you did. The cart bounces again. The manor is far behind. The road stretches ahead. You lean back against the cart's frame. The wooden slats warm from the sun. Your hand finds your belt. You still don't adjust it. just in case someone's watching. No one is, you exhale. Finally, and somewhere, just barely, you think you hear the clink of a goblet, or maybe it's just the wheels turning. As the sun climbs higher and the road flattens out, the rhythm of the cart becomes a kind of lullaby. Each wooden creak and stone bump rocks you gently toward reverie. You close your eyes for a moment, not to sleep, but to sift through the leftovers of memory. Not food, not really, but gestures, glances, silences, and one memory surfaces clearer than the rest: the loving cup. A strange name for what was essentially a shared goblet, passed hand to hand like a sacred relic and social minefield, all in one. You remember the way the steward lifted it with exaggerated care, how the person beside you wiped the rim before taking a sip, how your own fingers, slightly damp from nerves, trembled just a little as you raised it. The cup itself wasn't beautiful, pewter, dented, well used, but its journey around the table was a spectacle, one of those quiet dramas layered beneath the surface of the feast, because the loving cup wasn't just about drinking, it was about trust. In a world where poison was not unheard of, sharing a communal cup was a statement that you believed in the hospitality of the house, that you trusted your fellow guests, not to slip anything into the drink while your back was turned, that you understood the importance of shared ritual over personal comfort, and the rules around it. Oh, endless. Don't grasp the cup with both hands unless invited. Don't sip too long. Don't slosh the wine, no matter how full it is. And never, never be the one to refuse it. Historians still argue whether the cup began as a religious rite or pre-Christian folk tradition. Some say it originated in the Saxon halls. Others insist it was imported from Burgundy. Everyone agrees. It caused drama. There are tales of lords using the loving cup as a subtle insult, offering it last to someone out of favour or skipping them entirely, of guests pretending to drink and spilling wine down their front in theatrical accidents, of a woman who reportedly dropped the cup mid-pass and was never invited back. The floor, it turns out, holds grudges. But for all its peril, the cup also bonded the room. When you sipped, you became part of something ancient. You joined a circle of mouths, stories, and secrets. You tasted what others had tasted. You accepted the same risks. You participated. And as you sit now in the cart, the taste of that communal wine, spiced, slightly vinegary, suspiciously nutty, comes back to you, and with it, a strange sense of peace, because the loving cup, like the feast itself, was never about the drink. It was about the moment, the pause, the deliberate act of connecting across invisible borders. That's what the entire evening had been, an intricate dance of shared space. From the positioning of the salt to the carving of the meat to the careful wiping of fingers on scented cloths, it was all a slow-motion declaration. We are here together. And for a world divided by land, birth, faith, and fortune, that mattered. It still does. You glance at your hands, they don't shake anymore. Not because you've grown bolder, but because you've grown used to being careful, which, when you think about it, might be the most medieval thing of all. Because in that world, being careful wasn't cowardice. It was respect, survival, strategy. Etiquette wasn't weakness. It was power dressed up as politeness. You learned to chew slowly, not just to seem refined, but to avoid being the one with sauce on your chin when the Lord asked a question. You waited to drink not because you were timid, but because the cup told you where you stood. And in waiting, watching, learning, you became fluent in a language spoken only by those willing to listen before they speak. The cart slows slightly. A fork in the road appears up ahead. One path leads to the village, a market, a square, a place to trade stories. The other disappears into trees. The driver looks at you, left or right. You pause, left, toward people who will never understand what it means to be above or below the salt, or right toward solitude, reflection, a quiet stretch of path where you can hold on to this feeling just a little longer. You point right. The cart creaks into motion again, wheels crunching gently over.
Fallen leaves. A squirrel darts across the path.
A crow watches you from a branch, its head cocked slightly as if asking, "Did you get enough to eat?" You nod, silently, and then your mind drifts again, back to the torchlight, the carved fruit, the man who bowed too low, the woman who dropped her napkin twice but somehow made it seem like choreography. You think about how long people have gathered at tables, sat down, passed food, passed cups, passed judgment, and how, beneath it all, what people really passed was attention. You received it. You returned it, and now, long after the feast, you carry it. Quiet, careful, changed. The trees arch overhead now, gently shading the path as the cart creaks deeper into the woods. Sunlight dapples through the leaves, patterned like stained glass on the road ahead. It's quiet, peaceful. The only sounds are the rhythm of hooves, the occasional bird, and your own soft breath. You're full, not just of food, but of memory.
Of formality, of laughter, of restraint, of meaningful glances and meaningless garnishes, and somewhere in that quiet fullness, a strange realization blooms. You miss the rules, not because you enjoy rigidity. Your shoulders still ache from sitting
So straight, but because the rules made everything feel important. Every gesture mattered, every choice had weight. Even choosing when not to speak was its own form of conversation. You think back to the fish course again. Yes, the fish. 3 types of fish, each presented as if auditioning for sainthood. One poached in wine, one wrapped in herbs, one curled delicately around a slice of lemon as if hiding from judgment. And the server had whispered something to you. Remember, don't use the knife for the salted one. You hadn't planned to, but now you wonder, what if you had? What sacred balance would have tipped? Would the steward have appeared from behind a tapestry to sigh deeply and mark your name? With a single disapproving dot, that dot would haunt you. Because as you now understand, medieval dining wasn't just about impressing others, it was about proving to yourself that you belonged at the table, belonged among the people, who understood the quiet code of when to dab, when to sip, when to simply fold your hands and observe. It was never about the food, not really. It was about whether you could follow the rhythm without being told the steps, and you did. You remember the feeling of passing the trencher, of holding the cup, of watching a roasted duck be paraded like a visiting diplomat, of knowing, deep in your stomach, right next to the pastry, that you were part of something older than yourself, a tradition, a performance, a civilization stitched together by salt and bread and the soft clearing of throats. Even now, hours later, you find yourself sitting straighter on the cart, your hands resting just so, your foot tucked in, not because it's more comfortable, but because that's how it would look under the table. You chuckle softly. What strange muscle memory. But maybe that's the point. Maybe part of the magic of etiquette is that once it's lived in your body, it doesn't leave. It becomes part of how you see the world. You remember how the high table never needed to raise its voice. Power spoke in pauses, in glances, in who got the leg of the goose. You remember how a single servant could communicate entire commands with just the tilt of a tray. You remember how no one ever said, "Don't be greedy," but everyone saw when someone reached twice. These were lessons wrapped in bread crusts and fruit sauces, and now you wonder, what would a modern table look like under the same scrutiny? If someone watched how you buttered toast, or when you passed the salt, or how long you lingered over dessert, what would they learn about you? Not just your habits, your values. Because that's what etiquette truly is, a system for making visible the things you believe in. Generosity, patience, awareness, the ability to share food without making others feel small. And oddly enough, the medieval world, grimy, chaotic, and often brutal, understood that better than most. They used rules not to stifle people, but to protect them, to make room, to create a space where, for one evening, everyone knew their part, even the jester, even the dog, even you. The cart turns one last bend. You can see a small inn up ahead, a place to stop, rest, maybe even share your story with someone who thinks eating a pear with dignity sounds easy. You smile, let them try. You'll sit in the corner, order something simple, something fork-free, and let them talk about their day. And when they fumble a utensil or reach too quickly for the wine, you'll say nothing, just offer a napkin. And a knowing smile, because now you know manners are just kindness dressed in velvet, and sometimes that's
Enough. The cart stops.
the driver nods. You step down, stretch your legs, feel the sun on your face, and even now, as your boots crunch the gravel path toward the inn, you can still hear the faint music of last night's feast, the laughter, the lute, the slow hum, 100 tiny rituals unfolding like clockwork made of bread and wine, and inside you, a table still set. The innkeeper greets you with a smile, more curious than formal, the kind of expression reserved for travelers who look just clean enough to have stories worth hearing. You offer a few coins, a few words. He leads you inside and gestures to a table near the hearth. It's a modest place. Wooden beams, worn chairs, mugs with chipped handles, and the smell of onion soup already in the air. There's a cat asleep on the windowsill and someone tuning a lute with more enthusiasm than talent. You sit, and without thinking, you fold your hands. You wait, not because anyone has instructed you, but because the rhythm of waiting is now part of you. You listen to the sounds of spoons scraping bowls, the clink of mugs, a faint snore from a man in the corner. Eventually a bowl of stew is set before you, bread on the side, no ceremony, no steward, no floral garnish shaped like a falcon, just food, and yet you feel the urge to nod, to murmur a soft thank you, not just for the food, but for the simplicity. You dip the bread, chew slowly. You let the heat fill your mouth, let the salt settle on your tongue, not table salt, not status salt, but just salt, the good kind. And as you eat, you notice the others around you. One man drinks too loudly, a woman wipes her mouth with her sleeve. Two children chase each other between the chairs. No one flinches. No one marks a ledger. And yet, the echoes of last night remain. Not in judgment, but in contrast. Because when you've experienced the feast, the ceremony, the pageantry, the swan stuffed with fish, stuffed with custard, you see the world differently. Not better, just tuned. You appreciate the silence between bites. You notice the weight of the cup in your hand. You savor the pause before the next spoonful, as if you're waiting for an invisible host to grant permission. But tonight, you're the only one watching, and somehow that's enough. You think about all the rules you followed and all the ones you broke without knowing. Maybe you reached for a dish too early. Maybe you wiped your fingers on the wrong cloth. Maybe you lingered too long over the dessert with the gold-dusted cherries. It doesn't matter now, because you learned. Not just how to behave, but how to notice. The unspoken language of the feast. How a nod can be a compliment. How a pause can be an invitation. How a well-timed laugh can dissolve tension better than the strongest wine. You glance out the window. The sky has darkened into a soft velvet blue. Stars are waking up. A candle flickers beside you, its wax slowly pooling. And in that golden, flickering light, you reflect on the journey you came to the manor, a stranger. You sat at the edge of power. You drank carefully, nodded respectfully, and left without scandal. You were not the loudest. You were not the boldest, but you were there.
And you were part of it. You survived the feast. You may even be remembered for it. And that, in the medieval world, is more than most can hope for. A moment passes. The fire crackles. Someone sneezes and you realize you are content, not because
the stew is perfect. It isn't. Not because the chair is comfortable, it's absolutely not, but because you carry something now, an experience, a rhythm, a table etched in memory. And maybe, one day, you'll sit at another feast, you'll straighten your back, you'll nod at the salt, you'll reach for the loving cup with steady hands, and you'll know, without needing to be told, exactly where you belong. Because once you've dined in a world where every bite carries meaning, no meal is ever just a meal again. Not even stew in a village inn, not even this moment, shared quietly with yourself. And now you rest. Now you sleep. The fire is low now, your bowl is empty. And outside, the wind brushes softly through the trees, as if the night itself is whispering a lullaby, older than any manor, older than any feast. You lean back in your chair. The weight of the day, the feast, the journey, it all begins to settle, heavier in your limbs, lighter in your mind. You exhale. Slowly. Somewhere in the distance, a horse snorts in its sleep. A door creaks gently on its hinge. The innkeeper dims the lanterns one by one, and the world softens. No more elbows to mind, no more stewards watching, no more swans in
armor or sauces with names longer than your sentence. Just the flicker of firelight, the steady rhythm of your breath, and the quiet pride of having done something most people never will. You dined like a noble. You watched.
You listened. You learned. And now there's nothing left to do, so rest. Let the feast fade behind you like a dream you don't need to chase. Let the salt settle. Let the rules drift away like parchment ash in candlelight. You're safe. You're still. You're home. Sleep well, guest of the table. Your seat will always be waiting.